is there anything else that you want to say before we take off?
Here you go. We would like to welcome you to our Provo Municipal Council meeting and redevelopment agency. We will, today is Tuesday, May 1st. We're convened in the City Center Municipal Council chambers, and it is 5:34, and we will begin with the roll call.
Cliff Strachan. Dave Connect.
George Handley. Dave Sewell.
Gary Winterton.
David Harding.
George Stewart.
Kay Van Buren.
Mayor Kafusi.
This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, Provo City Council, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. The council requests that the citizens help maintain the decorum of the meeting by turning off electronic devices, being respectful to council and others, and refraining from applauding during the proceedings of this meeting. We will begin with an opening prayer and pledge, and we appreciate Andrew Fee for doing this for us and invite him to come forward.
For this day, please bless that the meeting will go well, and we thank thee that we could be here, and we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Andrew. We appreciate you doing that for us and participating today. We will turn the time over to Isaac Paxman for a presentation on Provo Serves.
Thank you. It's good to be here. You'll probably remember the mayor talking about wanting to highlight and celebrate Provo's spirit of volunteerism during her inaugural address. And this is part of that initiative. The initiative over time may change and evolve year to year, but for this year we wanted to let you know what we're focusing on. It's really about not trying to get people to do a whole lot that they haven't already been doing so much as just highlighting and celebrating what's already going on. Provo's already caught the spirit, and if we foster it a little bit, we'll feel glad. But even if we can just highlight it a little bit, we'll also feel glad about that. One of the main components is just an encouragement to do a little service, maybe something you're already doing, maybe something else. It could be a simple thing like picking up litter on your street. You could organize as a neighborhood. We've talked with Karen Tapahe about making sure the neighborhood chairs know about this and they can take advantage of it if they like. And the mayor would be glad to highlight any neighborhoods that stand out in doing a good job on this. We appreciate their support and invite all the neighborhood chairs to look at ways they can maybe do a little neighborhood cleanup or some other service that they feel good about. As you notice someone serving in the coming days, we'd appreciate if you're able to, snap a little picture of it and post it on social media with the hashtag Provo Serves. And we're hoping that this will help make it a little more fun and bring more attention to what we're doing. You can take a picture of someone else, you can take a picture of yourself. And one thing that someone suggested that we like the idea and we've taken up on is that we look at a way to maybe encourage the posting on social media by finding a donor who might be willing to donate to a cause for every social media hashtag we get. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about that at this point. We did find a donor who is willing to chip in $2 for every hashtag for a good cause. And we'll now pull up I've got a little video here that will show you about the cause that we selected. This was formed here in Utah, and this group has found a way that they can get a below-the-knee prosthetic on someone in a developing country for $100. They've been at it for several years. And again, started here in Provo in a great cause. And if we can just pull up that video, we'll just give you a little taste of where this money would go if we can get the involvement. So again, $2 gets per hashtag and $100 gets someone a leg. Are we able to pull that up?
Is there anything else that you want to say before we take off?
Here you go. Whoa.
mowing service.
But he is carpentry.
Yeah, you know how many days. And I'm in charge of the Provo City Code.
He developed a sore on his foot that just came out of nowhere. It was diabetes. It was just a little sore.
A truck ran over his leg, one right leg.
We'll go ahead and pause that video now. Just wanted to give you a sense of what we'll be supporting through this effort, which we feel good about. It's a way that Provo will not only be helping ourselves through the service we do, but through this extra feature, we'll be sending some help to people far away. And just a couple other things to let you know. On the initiative begins now. We're going to start promoting it on social media. You people can start posting and getting involved with this. There'll be a kind of a final push week, June 11th to June 16th. June 11th is our Movies in the Park event, and we'll be doing a little push on that. And during that week, we'll have some larger organized service events like trail cleanups that people can sign up for. We're creating a website and invite people to visit that website. It's service.provo.org. I believe that's maybe not yet up this evening, but this week it'll be up, where you can go and you can find other service opportunities, including through the United Way. Bill Holderstrom has been helpful with us on this. But again, you can do your own service as well. Final little component, we're going to celebrate and highlight some people who are outstanding service-oriented citizens. So if there's someone in your neighborhood, I'd love if you would think through who's that person who's been helping with Scouts forever or been helping in some other way, volunteering at the school. We'd love if you'd submit that a little bit on them, and the mayor will be selecting some of those to highlight, both in social media and at our event. Those can be submitted through an email address being set up at Provo Serves at provo.org. So it's Provo Serves at provo.org. So those are the basics of this initiative. I'll just say, you know, our mayor, I think, is really someone who likes to build others and build bridges and focus on the positive. And with all the important things she does, it's fun that she's able to find things like this that kind of reach above maybe the political fray and the tough decisions that have to be made as a mayor, and be kind of someone who builds the community. And so glad to be a part of this. Unless there's any questions, we'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Isaac. This is an exciting thing for us as a community, and we look forward to participating. And as a council, I'm sure that this will be part of our council blog and information that Karen can put out for us also. We'll now move on to item number 2, a presentation of the proposed tentative budget for Provo City Corporation for the fiscal year July 1, 2018 and ending June 20, 2019. And Mayor Kafusi will present this.
Good evening, gentlemen, and it's nice to see you from this side. You guys look fantastic. What a busy day. It has been a busy day. So we kind of put together, I decided to do my own letter. I know that if you've been here, you've probably heard a little more of a scripted letter, but that's not me, as you're all getting to know. A little bit out there and a little more feeling in it, I think. So as elected officials, one of the most important things a mayor and city council members do is come up with a budget. As you know, the responsibility starts with the mayor to prepare and present a proposed budget. My administration has worked long hours for many weeks on this. In doing so, we have tried to be sensitive to the feedback and input we've received from you city council members. And of course, we've tried to ensure that Provo City lives within its means by preparing a balanced budget. I have a strong personal commitment to that. There are some great things included in this budget. One that I am very proud of is the addition of critically needed police officers. I think we were all moved by the presentation given by our police chief, Chief Ferguson. Among other things, he highlighted his need for additional officers. I'm pleased to report that our new budget raises no taxes, but adds 5 full-time employees to our police force. The benefits to our citizens should be clear. We'll have a police force that can respond to our needs more quickly and more fully. In addition, morale among our police force should receive a boost. When some of our police officers have left us to go work somewhere else, they have said that at times they've been spread too thin. They run from one call to another, constantly in a reactive mode, and haven't been able to do the kinds of proactive work that they can do in other cities. And that is not okay with me. I'm thrilled that we are able to deliver these much-needed police officers. Besides doing a great job overall, our budgeting team has something else to be proud of. They have included this year some helpful performance measures. They tell me that you, City Council members, were positive about this idea when it was presented to you some time ago. This year, they deliver on that in a way they never have before. At first, they were hoping they could give you 2 or 3 performance metrics. But we are thrilled to be able to deliver far more than that. They are even on track to obtain recognition from a national organization as a result of their efforts to get you these new tools. Now let me share one more thing with you. In a meeting with the Provo City employees prior to my election, I was asked about the possibility of a cost of living adjustment. I was surprised to hear that the city had not had a COLA adjustment for several years. I told them, we did it at the school district, so I'll do it here. Well, I said it, so I'm doing it. To me, it is about that simple. Have I learned a lot more about our compensation system since I said those words? Yes. I have been glad to learn there are other things in place that do help employees here to increase their earnings over time. That gives me a better perspective. In coming years, we'll be looking at our compensation system, including at ways we can incentivize our workforce when they find a way to save the city money. But for now, I need our employees and you to know that this is a one-time COLA adjustment. The main reason I'm doing it is that I told the employees I would. As one human to another, if I tell you I will do something, I need to do it. So after some hard work, we have included in this budget a 1% cost of living adjustment for all our full-time employees. With gas prices over $3 a gallon, everyone is feeling the pinch. So I think the timing is good. Council members, I humbly ask you to support my effort to deliver on something I told these employees I'd get for them. Thank you for the hard work you do. It's very important, and I appreciate your association. In closing, I want to thank my budget team, particularly John Borgett and Dustin Gaba. I just told them as we walked in, please show up for work tomorrow because I've worked them so hard today. Their tremendous work on this is through the roof, and they've been so patient with me as I've tried to follow my instincts and called them in at the last hour to make changes and then look me in the eye and say, Mayor, we can do that for you. It's very reassuring. I love my team I have, and I love my directors and my employees, and I want them to know that. So I will now be turning the time over to John to share more details with you. Who cries over the budget? I do.
Thank you, Mayor Kafusi and Honorable Council. I'm pleased to share with you a little bit more information about the budget that we are prepared to deliver with you. I also would like to give a special thanks to Dustin. He is an amazing budget officer and has done such an excellent job and just a joy to work with, so I want to give him special thanks. The 2019 budget supports our ongoing goal of continued fiscal health and preventing a sustainable budget. Monies are invested in capital improvements, vehicle replacement, and employees. Provo City employees are among the greatest and most critical assets of the city, and by investing in them, we are better able to recruit, develop, and retain top employees. This year's budget the amount is $211,626,977. That is no small sum of money. Provo seeks and tries to continue to maximize every dollar and provide a great value to our residents. Our employees understand that every tax dollar we receive is a sacrifice from our residents who trust us to use it wisely. While preparing the 2019 budget, directors were asked to evaluate their budgets and look for possible savings that they were submitted. And I would just attest to you that our directors and employees are very conservative and try to stretch dollars as much as they possibly can. One of the things that we've done just a little bit different in this year's budget is that we have a separate document in the appendix section that lists all of the consolidated fee changes. And so as you want to look at the many detailed changes, we thought it was a cleaner and more organized way to put it, and so it will be in the appendix. This year, as part of the plan that was presented by Public Works 4 years ago, we have some rate increases. I'm just going to go through those utility rate increases here. And this is consistent with the plan that was shared earlier. We are recommending a 19% or $7.68 on average monthly increase for our wastewater utility services. An average 5% or $2.05 monthly for our water utility services. An average of 8% or 73 cents monthly for our stormwater utility services. And an average of 10% or $2.28 monthly for our sanitation utility services. Our energy rates this year are revenue neutral. However, there is an adjustment within the rates, increasing the base rate and lowering the price of the first 500 kilowatts of power, but they are revenue neutral. Want to just summarize a little bit again and go through in a little more detail the funded personnel costs that are included in the budget and our recommendation. Once again, as the mayor mentioned, there's recommended a cost of living increase of 1%. We also are recommending merit increases for our employees in their ranges of 2.5%. There was a market study that was completed by Daniel Softly, our HR director, and that adjustment, as a result of comparing the city's wages with other similar entities, is affecting 164 positions, and the impact to the city and included in the budget is $253,785. We also have in a number of our positions opportunities for career series advancements, and those are included. We have health insurance costs increase, and the percentage, we base this off of what's called the Millman National Medical Index, and it's 4.3%, which we feel like in today's medical environment, which includes prescription costs, that's a very good rate. But I would mention that still has an impact on the city budget of $578,245. In our retirement plan changes, there's only one small increase, and that comes from firefighters, and that's a 0.5%, so it's pretty small. And so fortunately for the last several years, we've had very minimal impacts on increases in our retirement plan changes. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the market has been doing well, and so that's been a positive not to have to face those increases. We also offer a 401k match of 2%, and this has been a very attractive benefit, and I feel strongly that it's been one of those things that our employees appreciate and helps us to retain good employees. In the expenditure area, we had this year, and we will be sharing this list with the council, submittal requests of $3,828,563. And one of the difficult tasks that we have is wading through those supplemental requests and deciding which ones we can fund and which ones we can't. And of those requests were our police officer requests that Mayor Kafusi shared with you. Out of that $3.8 million, the amount that we've been able to fund and that's included in the budget, and some of these were included in the existing budget this year, but most of them are in the 19 budget. The amount was $1,486,964. And so we were able to fund and are including in the budget submitted 39% of those that were submitted. We would love that to be 100%, because I can promise you, as I've reviewed each request, they all have warrant and they are all needs, but we have limited resources, and so we have to go through and prioritize and pick those that we feel like are most needed and most at this time. Excited to announce that as a result of changes in this year, we have the full funding, and we have included in the city's budget the Peaks Ice Arena. We're going to be showing that as an enterprise fund, and we're excited about that, and you'll be able to see that as you review the budget. Also, there's been some discussions recently about the importance of cybersecurity and making sure that the city has safe networks, and so we've included some money in the budget to address identified vulnerabilities and have some initial funding to start enhancing our security posture. Congress recently legislated what's called Project 25, which deals with a compliance assessment program to ensure that land mobile radio equipment complies with Project 25 standards for interoperability across suppliers. And there's been changes, and there's been new radios that have been developed, and it's went from analog to digital. There's been a need and a desire to develop a new standard that creates that ability to communicate. The Utah Communications Agency has built a Project 25 compliant digital infrastructure and will abandon the use of the non-compliant analog system in February of 2019, which is right in the middle or just past the middle of this fiscal year that we're currently budgeting. All Utah entities must replace non-compliant equipment by this date or lose local communications ability, and particularly in the event of a disaster or just being able to communicate. I'm pleased to let you know that included in the 2019 budget is funding to finance the replacement of all non-compliant radios across the city. There's been quite a bit of work. Chief Miguel has kind of led that effort. We have a committee. They've been meeting, and we feel like we're in a good posture and a position, and we're going to be ready to take those steps in the upcoming year. I'd always also mention there's a table that's in the letter that will be part of the budget that I'm reviewing right now that talks about the new positions, and we have them in three categories: some that are just funded by general fund revenues, others that are by user fees, and others that are by operating cost reductions. I would just mention that in our police department, we are recommending 4 officers and in the police department, and as well as a budget analyst in the police department. I've dealt with this firsthand as we work with the police over a number of years, and the need for a budget analyst that can analyze their budget, address their needs, and look at ways they can make sure they're reaching their overall goals as well as their financial goals is great. And so I very strongly support this recommendation. I want to talk a little bit about other funding. The Recreation Center continues to exceed revenue expectations and is being used heavily by its customers. Administration and the Municipal Council have a strong desire to have funding necessary to adequately maintain the facility so that it will be able to serve customers long-term, and the facility can continue to feel new and have equipment and services needed to keep up with the current trends. Well, one of the fortunate things that we've had is we've had such success with the rec center is revenues have exceeded expectations, and out of those revenues, we have this will be the 4th year, we've set aside money to replace those aging equipment and infrastructure so that as it needs to be replaced, we will have the funding mechanism there to support that. And I would just mention that that's included in this year's budget. Also, our general fund has a number of facilities it maintains. A number of them are old, similar to this facility here. But the administration and council has also had a strong desire to make sure that we set aside money so that we can take care and maintain these buildings and this equipment and infrastructure that's part of it. And included in this budget is also for the third year, we're setting aside funding which is accumulating and putting us in a better position to maintain this aging equipment and infrastructure here. Something new this year that came from Chief Miguel and our public safety is a desire to do something similar for our police and fire departments, so that their equipment, as it ages and as it becomes obsolete, that they have a funding mechanism to replace their equipment. And so we've started a fund, started some money, and it's a start, but it's always a good place to get started and start setting that up. And so included in this year's budget is the establishment and the start of a fund that we can set some money aside so that we can be better prepared in those areas as well. This year we continue to provide funding for a program of tuition reimbursement for our employees. We match 50%. We have a qualification process where they submit an application, have a committee that reviews those applications, and then we provide that option for those that qualify and those that have the highest needs. And this has been a great program. I really see firsthand, as I see applications and as we process payments, that we're bettering our employees and providing them with an opportunity to better themselves and their skills and also their abilities, and to be able to move up in the organization and grow our own people. And so we're excited that that's part of this year's budget. Since 2015, our recreation, arts, and parks, or our RAP tax, continues to provide much needed funding. This year we are budgeting $1.275 million, so it's up about $75,000 as we've seen growth. But of course this is for our much needed recreation and arts projects. I know that they've been doing planning and beginning the work on the river trail, and they're excited about some great enhancements that will be there, and that's also included in this year's budget. Provo 360, which is the citywide municipal software solution, is an important part of this budget. As a report, our finance applications are live. They have been for almost a year, since last June. And in recent months, our licensing and also community development applications went live. In the upcoming fiscal 2019, our plan and hope is to have our human management system go live, and then start the implementation of our customer information system, which would include our utility billing and our customer interface with our residents, as well as a work order management system. And so it's a big part of what we do, and it impacts a lot of employees, but there's a strong commitment there, and we are committed to help this project be successful. It hasn't been easy. There's been bumps in the road, but we have a strong commitment, and we're committed to it. The city has not only balanced its budget for the current year, but also continues to work with the municipal council and citizens and employees to create a long-term structurally balanced budget. By making good financial decisions that consider both the short-term and long-term impacts, Provo will become a stronger, healthier community in which we live, learn, work, and play. And we've included as part of the budget document our 10-year financial model, and each of you, as well as residents, will have an opportunity to review that and provide feedback, and I think you'll be able to see that we are continuing to make progress. We're not there yet, but we're working on it. We welcome and encourage your careful review of this recommended budget. We also welcome the input of our residents as we proceed through the process of adopting the city's annual budget. As always, our staff, the budget staff and finance and others in administration are at your disposal as you review the budget, and we are happy to answer questions, assist you in any way as a municipal council as you consider this huge task of adopting this budget. I would mention that the budget is available online right now. We just put it on within the last hour, and if you go to provo.org, this is for our council as well as our residents, and then go into finance and then reports and budget, you'll be able to pull it up and review it. Our plan for the municipal council is to have hard copies for the council members that would like it tomorrow. So we just need to know, I know George wants one, and I would mention that they'll be available in both summary or detail. And so you just make your order, and we'll make sure that we have it to you by the end of the day tomorrow. And with that, I would mention that Dustin is here, and I'm here, and if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them now, but that's just a short discussion on our budget.
Thank you, John. This is an amazing task, and it's a work of art to bring this forward to the council. Mayor, thank you. I know that there are several questions.
Gary, one second. Can we just give him a hand
I
of
thank
applause?
you, Kay. I think that's awesome.
Budget committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I would invite the council if they had any general questions. Let me talk procedure for just a minute. As in the past, we have wondered how to deal with as a council as far as accepting the budget. And we want to know, as a council, we would like you to know how much we appreciate the effort that goes into this. And the process, the state requires us to accept the budget, to vote on accepting a tentative budget. And that becomes really an unusual word, to accept a tentative budget, because we know we've got 6 weeks to review it.
If I'm correct, it's not that you were being asked to accept it, but you're asked to tentatively adopt the tentative budget.
Thank you.
Without having a chance to have reviewed it.
And that becomes a little challenging, but so we have decided as leadership to bring this back next week for that motion to tentatively adopt the budget. That way we have it in our hands and we actually can do it. Sometimes people have thought, well, we need to do it right now, and it's not. We don't need to do it right now. It's not important. You're required to do it today. We are not required to tentatively adopt the budget, but we want you to always know how much we appreciate the work that goes into this. Sometimes that has been perceived that the council wants to take control. We want you to know how much we appreciate the work that goes into this. Each department head, they present the budget to you, and then you got to play with it and give it back. We understand the back and forth that goes on. So we are so grateful for the work that's done, and we are following procedures by doing it the way we're doing it right now. It helps us feel a little bit more comfortable. With that being said, the council will recognize that this will be back on in 2 weeks to tentatively adopt the proposed budget. And then we will have a meeting on what's the date for June?
So the two hearing date, in 2 weeks when we come back to tentatively adopt the tentative budget, you'll pass a resolution adopting a schedule for the public hearings, which will be June 5th and June 19th.
And then on June 19th,
would be the final adoption.
With the final adoption, and we will either adopt it as is or opt for a truth and taxation.
Right. The only caveat is if you have truth and taxation, that
then
gives us time till August. We're also looking at the possibility of a budget retreat 3 weeks from today.
So just so the council is aware of the process that we're going to be going through in the next little while. With that being said, thank you again. Do the council have any general questions that they would like to ask at this time? And again, let's try to keep it general so that we can specifically, then we'll get the budget and we can get into the more details in some further time. George?
I can't wait to get my hard copy, number one. Number two, congratulations on adding 4 police officers. It's been long promised, but not delivered on till now. So I want to see the magic you've done to do a budget that's added all the things you've added today and still have our new police officers. Thank you.
We're excited about it. Thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead, Dave.
So in the past, we had talked about police officers and where to get the money, and we'd also talked about possibly, as a form of resolution directed us to consider raising property taxes a little bit. So is that part of the picture?
No, in the proposal that we're delivering to you just right now or tonight, there is not a recommended property tax increase as part of the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? I've got a question then. I look at the new programs, the new things that you've talked about putting in. Is this an appropriate time to ask for some of the things that you've had to take out to be able to do the things? Can you mention some of those things?
It's interesting because if you want to compare pages, okay, this budget book this year is 30 pages shorter. One of the things that we've done, and I think it's a really, really good thing, I'm excited about it, is that we had a lot of duplication in years past with the CIP, because we delivered to you the 5-year CIP report in March, and then what we did in the budget book is we pretty much replicated it in the budget book. Well, this year what we did is we summarized at the level that we budget, which the council agreed when we made the switch last year to budget basically at the function level, and we reported it that same way. And so that's created a lot of savings. What are some other areas where the
in previous years, a lot of our attempts to convey accomplishments, performance metrics have been narrative in nature. The new performance metrics being in a chart that relates them to priorities established in Vision 2030 heavily consolidates that narrative, and so it's a more efficient and I think a more effective way of communicating what our departments are doing for citizens of Provo.
Thank you.
Council, staff is preparing a question and comment list to share with Dustin and John, and if you have any questions prior to the next meeting that you would like some answers or have them consider in advance of the next meeting, just send it to me or Elizabeth and we'll get that, put it to our list.
Dave?
Just a follow-up to Mr. Connect's comment on that council resolution of a few years ago to do a property tax inflation adjustment. Is that something the administration would welcome? And the second part of the question is, would that be enough to provide an additional police officer? I don't remember the magnitude of that.
We have done a little bit of analysis, and we have what we call our property tax calculator. And we've looked at, and what I would propose that we would do, if you'd like, is in our next upcoming work session when we're going to discuss the budget, we can bring that calculator and we can share some numbers with you. It's all based on what our current general fund property tax rate is, how much it would generate, what the rate it would require, and we'd be prepared to go in detail with you in that meeting if you'd like.
Income to the city, and I guess that'll be in the, we'll see that. Has our income increased because of the economy? And
one of the revenues that the number one revenue source for the city and local governments typically, and for Provo, is sales tax revenue. And we have seen pretty strong sales tax revenue. Matter of fact, our current projection is over $1 million on what it was the prior year, and so that was a real positive inflow right there, and that's just an example. But the economy is, we continue to be cautiously optimistic. You know, it can be a fragile thing, and so we've been conservative still, even with the revenues that we put in, because we want to minimize the likelihood of having to come back and say, look, we need to do some cuts because we budgeted too high. So we've tried to be conservative, but still we've seen some positive trends with revenues, and particularly sales tax.
Thank you. Mr. Harding?
That $1 million, is what is that percentage-wise, just ballpark? Is that a 10% increase? Is that a 2% increase?
I don't know if you...
I want to say it's about 8.
Yeah, I think it's more like around 5 or 6%, but we can look at that. But yeah, it's in that range.
Good enough. Thank you.
The state as a whole is trending positive. Matter of fact, we're slightly behind the state. on their growth rate, just based on our retail and the size and the growth of our retail, but still real positive.
Any other general questions? And I'm sure we're going to get into a lot of specifics over the next few weeks. And thank you for all you've done.
Thank you. We look forward to working with the council.
As indicated on the screen, a required public hearing will be held for certain agenda items prior to council action. After each such item has been presented, time to comment will be provided for those who wish to speak. For items that do not require a public hearing, public comment will be taken following presentation of the item, but will be limited to 10 minutes. At this time, 15 minutes have been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow comment on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Persons who speak during this time to an item that is on the agenda will not normally be afforded a second opportunity to speak during the comment period specific to that item. During any public comment period, each speaker will generally be limited to 2 minutes. Additional time may be given to individuals specifically invited to speak, such as applicants, neighborhood chairs, or others that may be representing additional persons. Please begin your comments by stating your name and city of residence. Due to noticing requirements, no formal action will be taken in this meeting on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Those wishing to comment now are welcome to come forward. Well, that was easy enough. Thank you. We will then close public comment period and move on to item number 3, a resolution approving a substantial amendment to the 2015 Five-Year Consolidated Plan to incorporate the use of Section 108 loan guarantee programs. And Dan Gonzalez will present this for us.
Thank you, Mr. Winterton. Hello, everyone. So last week we came with holding a public hearing, continued to today, on the issue of amending the consolidated plan, the 2015 consolidated plan, which gives an idea of how CDBG and home funds will be used. The reason for the amendment is so that we can include the possibility of using a Section 108 loan to assist in the municipal airport expansion related to the project for Duncan Aviation. So back in 2015, even though the plan with Duncan Aviation was forward, it had not been considered whether the 108 Section 108 loan would be used. Later in further analysis and different conversations with council over the last couple of years, this proposal came to use this Section 108 loan. There have been several discussions and work meetings and council meetings and public hearings regarding the use of this funding. However, in the process, we needed to have a specific language indicating to the citizens and other interested that the consolidated plan needed to be amended to consider the use of this funding. This is the reason why we're here. So the 30-day comment period began on April 1st and concluded yesterday. At work meeting last week, I think it was Councilmember Connect had asked if the CDG committees that typically review the funding proposals they knew about the use of the proposal of using the Section 108 loan, and they hadn't. So after that meeting, I sent an email to all those committee members, including subrecipient agencies as well, and had two responses from a subrecipient. This is Rocky Mountain University of Health Professionals Foundation. Mr. Victor Morris said, "I am in favor for any improvements at the Provo Municipal Airport." And Joshua Corden, who is a member of the CDBG Capital Projects Committee, states, "It seems like an interesting proposal. Improving the airport definitely does good for businesses in the community." Without really knowing anything else about it, my initial thoughts are summed up in the question, does improving the airport serve and support the lower income areas of the city? If it does, then I think it could be a good use of the money. So other than that, we have not received any other comments through phone, email, or letter. Maybe perhaps there are some people today in the public hearing that will express some opinion on that. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. This item is open for public hearing. Again, I mean, we've had it for 30 days, and we will continue this one more time for any other comments today that would like to be made. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council for any discussion that we might like to have. Mr. Sewell.
So my understanding, and Mr. Gonzalez could correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that we already made a decision, the previous council made a decision to use this 108 loan, and this is more a matter of some housekeeping to allow that to happen. Is that it?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
No, you're right. Any other comments? If not, we do have an implied motion on the table. From what I understand, isn't that correct, Mr. Jones, that we can use this as an implied motion? Any discussion? If not, then I will call for a vote. Those in favor of this resolution, please indicate. That passes unanimously. Thank you. Right. And we'll move on to item number 4, a public hearing on the program year 2018 annual action plan, 4-year update to the 2015 consolidated plan, including CDBG and HOME funding recommendations. This is the beginning of a public process, so there will not be any motions for this on this particular item. This is an open. This is a hearing. This is for an open hearing today.
That's correct. Yes. So every year when we submit a 5-year consolidated plan to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, that comp plan includes the first year action plan, which contains the activities that are proposed for that first year. And every year thereafter, as HUD allocates CDBG and HOME funding, we go through a process to identify what activities and projects will fit the goals, priorities, and explain or included in the comp plan, and which will be funded for that particular year. So today we begin a 30-day comment period on the draft of the action plan, which is located in our website. It can be accessed that way. We also have a copy in our office. We have noticed a couple of different times in the paper the availability, and we have emailed and contacted other individuals that in the past have been involved in the process. The purpose of the comment period is for them to review the draft of the plan and make any comments that they express any opinions on it. Typically, in years past, we've come at a separate time to bring to council the funded recommendations for CDBG and HOME. This year, we're streamlining that process so that it's easier, so that we are able to bring those two items together, which is how it should be. And this year, we have so we have the committee chairs from both CDBG committees, the Capital Projects Committee and the Public Services Committee. Will be doing a presentation on the recommendations they have for those two committees, and I'll cede the time to them. Brad Bishop is the chair for the Capital Project, CDB Capital Projects Committee.
Hello, Council and Mayor. My name is Brad Bishop again, representing the Committee of Five. We've met and had a number of requests, 11 requests to be exact. Maybe I should ask first of all if there's any questions on the requests. I think you have all had a chance to see it. Only a couple of those that were have had some unspent funds last year did not get recommended for this year, but for the most part, each of the requests had some amount of funding, and if on one of the highest priorities was the 200 East bicycle and pedestrian improvements, if there were more funding available for what was given this year, that would get any excess to the project, or would be reduced if HUD does not award as much. Maybe I can just clarify that there's several from the city are making requests for CDBG funds. The others are for nonprofit agencies. 2 or 3 of those are requesting for some maintenance to their facilities, help those that are lower income or in certain special needs categories. And that includes the House of Hope, the United Way Community Action Agency, and Wasatch Mental Health Vantage Point. Not a lot to explain on that, unless there's any questions that you want to pose for me or for Dan. There we go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
If there are no questions, then we'll have Mr. Kirby Snideman, who is the committee chair for the CDBG Public Services Committee, make his presentation.
Oh, we do have a question. George?
I just have kind of a general question, so it's not specific to what we were just looking at, but it's
Okay.
On the Year 4 action plan. On page 44, it says, while the City of Provo and consortium cities do not fund services that directly affect homelessness, it is their intent to support agencies with programs that assist the homeless and help people that are vulnerable to becoming homeless. We also continue to work with other organizations, including those that serve and coordinate with the Mountain Land Continuum of Care. I'm just curious, I mean, that seems very important and very ambitious, but it's very vague to me about what it means to help people that are vulnerable to becoming homeless, but not actually funding the services that directly affect them.
Yeah, typically, the city does not fund any programs that assist the homeless. That's the reason for the language included there. But again, we work with the continuum of care. I go to their meetings every month and discuss different ways that we can support the efforts. The continuum of care is made up of a number of agencies, many of them who provide services to homeless. Could you
just give me an idea of like what it means to work with them, or to, I mean, like what exactly are you getting in? What kind of weeds are you getting into with them to help them do their job better in Provo?
The needs of different homeless individuals, either chronic homeless or other, are discussed at the meetings, and we provide information on how we can help them. I guess I'm being still quite vague about it. Some of the items discussed are processes to streamline the availability of services provided to them. And again, none of these are directly city provided, are through the agencies. So specifically directly, the city doesn't work with homeless. We work with the agencies in supporting them and providing information or any other things that we may be able to provide.
I mean, does that include? I mean, again, I'm not trying to challenge it.
In some respects,
I want to know what we're doing specifically to help them, meet those problems more successfully. I mean, are you providing them data about how many people the police are reporting are homeless, or where they're reported to be homeless, or what their particular conditions are that might help us know which agencies they ought to be going to?
All of this data is provided. Again, not specifically from the city, the police and fire. Actually, Chief Miguel is present in all those meetings. I guess one of the very important aspects of the support that the city directly provides to the continuum of care is every year there's a point in time count that needs to be made. And both police and fire departments provide a lot of support for the volunteers that go out and count these individuals, both in security and actually doing the count.
Could I try answering that, and then you can say if I'm accurate or not? Just quickly looking over Exhibit B, C, and D that we were provided, I'd say 2/3 of those lines are money that Provo City controls, grants that we've received, and then we disperse those to those organizations, and that's how we don't take that money and directly provide services, but we give it to these community partners who then supply it. But I would say 2/3 of the lines on here is exactly how we fulfill that paragraph.
And I guess I was saving that not to steal Kirby's thunder about how we support financially those organizations.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Stewart.
I'd just like to thank the committee. I know how much hard work they go to allocate those funds. A lot of meetings, meet a lot of organizations, so thank you so much for the effort.
You're welcome, George. Kirby Sneidman here, the North Park Neighborhood Chair. I was invited to participate in the committee with other neighborhood chairs and determine where the funding is going to be laid out for the future year. It took, I believe, three times we met?
Total of 4.
4. We met 4 times for a couple hours, 2 to 3 hours each night. We heard presentations that ranged 15 minutes from various groups, all of which we voted to receive some amount of funding. About 10 minutes of each presentation was the representative from an organization, usually the leader of that organization sharing with us why they're requesting those funds. And then we spent typically about 5 minutes asking questions. And then we had some discussion amongst ourselves. Thankfully, Dan provided a very good process whereby we could know what the city's, what the staff's recommendation were, and then we took those recommendations and had a discussion. I'm here to answer any questions about how we decided to allocate those funds. We stuck very closely to those recommendations, but we also varied. The large way that we varied was we wanted to make sure that those organizations which were asking for this funding, and it was a significant portion of what they were doing, rather than some of the larger organizations that were asking, that amount made up maybe less than 1% of their budget. We wanted to make sure that that those organizations that were asking for something that was a big part of their budget, that they got more of that we prioritized those, especially those that we felt were making a very good impact in Provo. But like I said, everybody received funding, and for those that did we vote for everybody to receive funding? That's right. But we didn't vote to give everybody 100% of what they asked. But if we do receive more from the federal government than we assumed that we would get, then we had a process that we recommended that it would be received in the order that staff recommended based on their score. Here to answer any questions, but I just want to say that it was a pleasure to serve with fellow neighborhood chairs in this process. I'm grateful for the City of Provo that they asked for volunteers from the neighborhood to see how we allocate these funds. It was a great process to see. I know you already donate so much of your time that it would have been too much for you to sit through those meetings, but I can tell you that there's some great work being done in Provo by these organizations, and I think these dollars that are spent are very well utilized by these organizations.
Thank you.
And finally, if we can put up Exhibit C, the HOME Consortium, and again, just a little background on that. Provo City is the only city in the county that receives a direct allocation of home funds, but the program allows for the formation of a consortium that could bring funding that otherwise would go directly to the state to be brought to the area. Members of the consortium are the city of Lehigh and the city of Orem, which also receive CDBG allocations, and the county of Utah County, which are an urban county also receiving CDBG. There are a few units of government within the county that did not join with Utah County in the CDBG interlocal agreement, and therefore also disqualifies them from being part of the consortium. But every other city that joins with the county can participate and benefit from these funds. So what you see here is the estimated amount we projected, $1,069,000. 10% of the grant is permitted to be allocated for the administration of the funds. And at the end of the fiscal year 2016, we had received $1,003,655, I think that's what it is. $855 in program income. What that means is the funding that is provided through the home program is always made in the 99% of the time made in the form of a loan. Once the activity is finished, whether it's the construction of a home or providing down payment assistance to a family, when funds are completely utilized and returned to us, then that's what is program income. The funding carries the same type of requirements as it had when it went, and so all we do is put it back into the pot so that we can allocate it. So the recommendation says for the 10% of the administration. One other aspect of the home program is that there's organizations called community housing development organizations, for which the program dictates that at least 15% of the entitlement allocation for the year must be awarded to them. In the consortium, we have three such organizations, which in short are called CHODOs. Two of them are Habitat for Humanity and Rural Housing Development Corporation. The other organization is NeighborWorks Provo. They changed their name a little bit, but it's still NeighborWorks. The funding is allocated, the CHODO part of the funding is allocated to only these two CHODOs because they are the only ones that submitted an application. And typically, when it comes to CHODO funding, it's typically divided evenly among the CHODOs that have submitted an application. The rest of the funding, as you can see, includes two programs that are tenant-based rental assistance. One that has been funded for at least 10 years is the Reentry Assistance Program, which allows recently released individuals from jail, from county jail, to not be homeless. And this program provides housing for them. That's what we use the home funding. And the organization secures other type of funding for case management and assisting them in break the cycle of addiction. The new was the application from the Housing Authority of Utah County, which is proposing a tenant-based rental assistance program for victims of domestic violence. The other 4 programs we have funded throughout the years. 2 of them reside within the redevelopment agency. We provide down payment assistance programs for Provo citizens. It's one separate program, providing up to $10,000 of down payment assistance to families that qualify according to income anywhere in the city of Provo. And the other program is the loan-to-own program, which serves all the other consortium cities. And lastly, Habitat for Humanity and Rural Housing, which are, they construct new affordable housing. That's the other 2 programs that requested funding. I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you may have.
Dave?
So Provo administers the consortium, kind of the head of the consortium.
Correct.
And it's probably fair to say that we're kind of doing a service for the other communities by serving in that role.
Correct. We are identified, in order to form the consortium, we have to enter into an interlocal agreement with the other members. And yes, we are identified as the lead entity, which covers all the administration, make sure all the requirements are followed for the other consortium members.
And because we're working with others, there's more money coming in than if we were just working alone.
That's correct.
If we were just working alone, which I'm not recommending, but if we were just alone, how much would we get roughly?
It would be about 48, 47. It depends on how population is. About 47, just to break even, % of the amount that we're getting here. So is that less than $500,000?
And how much of this funding would you say is being spent in Provo then?
Historically, there's been quite a few number of projects. I prepared something like this last year, and I failed to bring it today, to update it and bring it today, but there's anywhere from $15 to $20 million over the last 25 years that the funding has been used that has benefited Provo residents in different forms. An example of a project is the Cascade Gardens, which is a project that the Provo City Housing Authority constructed on 500 West. This last year, Habitat for Humanity completed 2 homes at 500 North and 500 South and 500 West, an additional down the block on 500 West, and it's in the process of finishing the last of 3 homes built at 3rd South and about 6th East. There's a number of other projects that have benefited the Provo citizens. In particular, the down payment assistance program alone, I would say it's served, at least in the last 10 years, anywhere from 300 to 400 individuals that receive down payment assistance.
So I guess the question that I'm asking is, are we getting our 47%?
Well, you can look at it. You can look at it.
Wanes and
you can look at it from 2 different ways. In the comp plan, we bring up the fact that most of the affordable housing is centralized in Provo. So you can look at, are we getting the 47% bang for the buck when we support other cities to bring affordable housing to those communities rather than centralizing it in Provo? So you can look at it in 2 different ways.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Mr. Harding.
Yes, just a real quick question, just so I'm clear and maybe others are clear, that the plan is, this is just being introduced, and then in 4 weeks?
Right, on June 5th.
June 5th.
We'll come back, having closed the,
5 weeks. And so in 5 weeks, the comment period will be closed, and at that point, you would look for us to vote on the plan.
correct. I should probably mention, so these figures that we're working with for recommendations for funding are estimated figures. The federal budget was passed at the end of March, and HUD had 60 days to provide us with actual funding amounts. Just earlier today, we did receive those final amounts, and we will be updating these documents and make them available to you based on the recommendations from the committees as to how to manage that increase of funding. It's actually an increase, I guess I should say that. We are receiving roughly $144,000 more than estimated for CDBG and about $440,000 more in home funds. Anyway, these exhibits will be updated and will be made available so that you can look at that.
Question. Okay. So in reading through the material, I was looking at the proposal from Rural Housing Development in Salem, I believe it was, to
Yes.
purchase 50 acres and build affordable, I believe, owner-occupied housing.
Single family, yep.
Yeah, and it would help 30 families, it said. So I'm not sure how that works out because it's 50 acres and only 30 families, but I guess there's some of the area that isn't buildable.
No, one of the benefits of the, or the purposes of the home program is to leverage funding. In contrast with CDBG funding, when you use $1 of CDBG funding in any project, then the whole project becomes federalized and all requirements are applicable to the project. With home funding, you can leverage the funding and you can assign a number of home-assisted units that will be using that home funding, but will be part of the overall project. The project itself could include market rate units or not. In the particular case, and it just happens to be that Mr. Bishop is here, he could provide more information if he wanted to. They use other funding from the USDA. What does that stand for? Department of Agriculture. And pretty much 100% of the units are affordable units. It's just home funds are not invested in all of the units, but just a few of the units.
Okay, so the home funds in question would support or help with 30 of the units out of the entire project.
Right.
And
the purpose of home funds is to function as a bridge for larger projects.
right, so this is not low-income rental housing, it's low-income owner-occupied.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. As stated, we will open this item up for public hearing. Please come forward, state your name and city of residence.
My name is Vic Morris. I live in Payson. I work here in Provo. I'm the director of Rocky Mountain University Health Professions Foundation. And if I'd known that Mr. Gonzalez was going to use my coat, I would have embellished it quite a bit. But I just wanted to extend the gratitude of our foundation, and hopefully, I'm not speaking out of turn, but all the other nonprofits that have benefited from CDBG funding. It is making a difference. I am able to witness firsthand how it has improved the lives of those that are being served, those that are the underserved of the community. And I get to see the improvement of the quality of their lives and also how grateful they are. And I just wanted to thank you. We really greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Karen McCandless, and I am the Executive Director of Community Action Services and Food Bank. I had the opportunity to serve on the Non-Public Service Allocation Committee and enjoyed that association with those good people. I too wanted to express our appreciation as an agency for the recommendation that's been given for 2 of our projects at Community Action. And I believe that they will speak to Councilmember Hanley's question. The first one that, just very briefly, recommended that we receive support for is for support services to help Provo families who are either homeless or on the brink of homelessness. We receive funding that will actually pay for the deposits and a couple months' rent for that, but the administrative costs and the case management costs are we're very limited in what we can charge toward those grants. So those monies that we receive from CDBG go to help with a comprehensive case management plan and to help those families not only secure temporary housing, but have them move toward permanent housing, and then ultimately, like we work with the continuum of care, toward home ownership. And so that's what some of the funding that's been recommended we receive will do. The other funding will help continue our program of providing multiple open doors to families in the ability to receive food. Yesterday, I looked out my office window, which is right above the bike rack at ground level, and I watched a woman going through a pile of papers on the dashboard of her car. And I thought about what it's like to be in poverty, and you have different agencies. Everybody wants some other piece of information. Everybody wants an ID, but somebody wants this, somebody wants that. And it's hard to keep track of all that information. So if we can help streamline it to where if somebody's going to Wasatch Mental Health or to Head Start for services, they can actually do the food intake there and then give them a card and they can come to us. And so we try to make that as streamlined as possible. Again, I express our appreciation for the consideration of that funding. And I don't know who would be the best person to give these to, but I have some information about what our agency does. We do a wide variety of services to help individuals become self-reliant. Is it to give to the recorder, or who would be the best, or Mr. Chairman, would it be you be the best one, or
our council director?
Oh, okay.
Give it
All
to
right.
Brian for right now.
All right, I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. My name is Cheryl Adamson. I'm a resident of Provo, and I'm also the Director of Recreation and Habilitation Services, or RAW. We also are grateful for the support that we received through the Community Development Block Grant program. And I'd like to express my gratitude to the time that you take to consider these funds that come to Provo to be distributed to nonprofit agencies that are helping the citizens of Provo, as well as to committee members who devote a great amount of their personal time to listen to people like me talk about the people that I care about and the issues that I care about as I try and help individuals who have disabilities that live in our community. And I just want to say that I've been a part of the RAW organization for 25 years, and all of those years we've had a great relationship with Provo. We're located in Provo, and the CDBG funds have blessed many lives and made a tremendous difference. We're one of the organizations that was mentioned earlier that we don't get state and federal funding. We don't use taxpayer money to run our programs. So this is the one exception that we make where money that's connected to a government source comes to our organization. Otherwise, we're doing yard sales and fundraising and doing other things. And we're so grateful for those funds that are helping individuals with disabilities who live in Provo City that are part of our community. And I thank you for your time and your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Lisa Heaton, and I am a resident of Salt Lake City, but I'm the executive director of House of Hope, and we have 6 facilities in Salt Lake, and 1 facility, our campus that's at the south of Provo. And again, that's House of Hope, and I just really appreciate Dan Gonzalez and the work that the council's done and the support that we've had from Provo over the years. A lot of people don't realize House of Hope is 72 years old, and we were actually the first treatment center in Utah County under Utah Alcoholism Foundation. It was called the CUATC, and it was built south of the valley with a piece of property given by Provo, and in 1968, and we've operated ever since in that location. We have evolved over the years to become, we changed our name to House of Hope, which was a division of the Utah Alcoholism Foundation to serve specifically mothers and children, and these are mothers with substance use disorders and their young children, and so we combine family reunification with substance abuse treatment, and such a critical need and an ever-growing need as we see the overdose problems and the children that are born with the problems that they have due to parental drug addiction. I've been at House of Hope for 18 years, so long enough to see what the CDBG program does, and there are many times where I think of all the different projects we've had, and for organizations like House of Hope that are local, we're only in Salt Lake and Provo. There's many House of Hopes if you look it up on the internet, but we're only in Utah. We were homegrown here and developed into the 7 facilities we have now, but we just couldn't survive without the help because we don't have that national support. And we're currently in the process of renovating and trying to fix up the dorms that we have. We're turning them into 6 cottages that will serve, they'll have 32 beds and we'll be able to serve 16 families. And we want every bed to be full. We feel like there's a woman in Utah County that needs every one of those beds, and that's our goal. So again, thank you for your support this year and over the last 72 years the House of Hope has been working in Utah. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no one coming forward at this point, we will close the public hearing portion of this and recognize that this will be coming back to the council on June 5th for a final vote. Mr. Harding?
I just wanted to say thank you to Ms. Heaton, Ms. Adamson, Mr. Morris, Ms. McCandis, and everyone who served on these committees. To the service providers, you're really where the rubber meets the road. We're given this responsibility to make sure that this money is allocated appropriately, wisely, but you're the ones that are actually providing the services, and we are very grateful to the services that you provide our residents. To the committee members, it can be overwhelming, all of the options that we have and this responsibility that we have and feel keenly, and the confidence that we have in you that we can rely on your efforts to vet and to ensure that the proposals that are coming before us are quality and will make a difference. Makes it much easier to fulfill our responsibility. So thank you to everyone.
Mr. Gonzalez, would you give us a list of the people that were on the committees for our next meeting for the June 5th one? I'd appreciate having that for us. Okay, we will now move on to item number 5, a resolution approving a wastewater self-assessment in accordance with Utah Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. And Rebecca will present this for us.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I appreciate this opportunity to present this. This is not as exciting or special as the last presentation, but this self-assessment report is definitely a very important thing for our system. This is part of the our permit that is required by the state as part of our UPDS permit for the sewer collection system, which is slightly different from the permit for our wastewater treatment facility. And we have, within the collection system, there is a sewer management plan. If you could switch over, please, to the PowerPoint presentation. We have I'm just going to run through very quickly the reason why we do this. The Utah Water Quality Board has the power and authority to develop programs for the state and abatement of new or existing pollution to the waters of the state. The goal of the permit for the collection system is the opposite of what it is for the treatment plant, which is not to allow any discharge from the sewer collection system. We actually want the collection system only to discharge to the treatment facility. And so in order to do that, we want to make sure to allocate adequate resources, to establish a proper rate structure, and to provide adequate capacity within our collection system piping and our lift stations and other conveyance structures. This sanitary sewer management program is required for every collection system within the state. It is, as part of that, there are 2 documents that the City of Provo is required to have. The first document is the sewer management plan, and the second document is the sewer, the system evaluation and capacity assurance program. And that is also called the CCAP. So the system management plan is a plan to schedule, to properly manage and operate and maintain all parts of the sewer collection system to reduce sewer system overflows. And so what we do, we go through and we televise the system. We use our TV truck to make sure that the system is clean. And so we look at all the pipes, make sure they're not broken or clogged in any way. And then we use our jet truck to clean and all the pipes. And so we have our operation and maintenance program. We map them. We have an action plan if there is an overflow that does happen. We have a pre-treatment program that makes sure we don't have grease, oils, or anything within there. We monitor the system, and we have a basement backup program. The pictures on here are showing our pipe patch, and we have pipe patch materials that we can send inside the pipes and actually expand those materials to repair inside the pipes without cutting open the streets. So we also have several lift stations within the city, and we make sure that they are properly cleaned and maintained so that they are functioning properly. Our system evaluation capacity assurance program makes sure that we have enough capacity within our pipes to carry all of the flows, both just regular daily flows, peaking flows, and stormwater, and if there's groundwater that infiltrates into the pipes. This last year, to the council we've been talking about, we've had 32 flow meters throughout the city, and we've been monitoring them since the 1st of February and making sure that there is plenty of capacity and watching when there's storm events, watching groundwater go up and down, just making sure that everything's good. And so far, we have not seen any concerns within the system. So once that flow study is completed, we will update the CCAP with all of those results and put that information in there. The annual report that is being presented and that will be adopted by resolution tonight meets all of the required reporting that is part of our sanitary sewer management plan. And completing of this report allows us to be put on the priority list for funding if we go for state funding. And it also gives our operators continuing education units for filling out that report. Are there any questions or comments?
No, thank you very much. We had this presentation earlier today in work meeting, and we are appreciative, very appreciative of the progress and the maintenance that's been put on into our sewer system, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
This item is open for public comment. So we will open it up for public comment at this time. Seeing none, we will close it and bring it back to the council for any discussion and a motion. I guess we have an implied motion, so we'll go with discussion first. Mr. Harding.
So my comment in the work session was just off the cuff, but I do kind of want to repeat it tonight, where I believe more of the public is listening. You began your presentation saying that this isn't as special as the last one, but it's still important, and I agree that it is very important. All's well when there's no problems. No one really thinks about it when there's no problems. But if we were having those SSOs, I believe they were, if we were having sewers backing up, through the streets and into houses and things like that, it would be very, very important to our residents. And so thank you. The report, as I see it, is broken down into three parts. One part looks at our financial, the financial picture. One looks at the collection, and then one looks at the sewer treatment plant. And the collection system and the sewer treatment plant, that self-assessment shows that we're passing with flying colors. I believe 0 SSOs last year. There were no overflows. We heard from a more experienced resident in Provo that hasn't always been the case, and so we are doing a very good job with that. And also the report on our sewer treatment plant is passing with flying colors, even though we know that plant is being held together by figurative duct tape, and but still. It's performing very well, and I attribute that to just the amazing staff that we have, and just want to thank you for the service and the quality of service that you provide the residents of Provo. That the third or the first of those three sections, though, is our financial picture, and if I remember right, we only passed one out of the 11 or so categories, indicating that our rate structure is not sufficient currently, and that we're not putting enough resources into the long-term maintenance and upkeep. And this is no surprise to anyone who's been paying attention over the past couple of years. We do need to replace our sewer treatment plant. We do need, and we need to adjust our rates to for that reality. But I guess just broadly, I do feel like, despite not always fully funding our services, our city staff generally provide amazing service, particularly for the amount of resources that we put into it. So thank you very much, and so thank you.
Okay, we have an implied motion for this item, for the resolution, which is on our screen. This time then I'll call for a vote. Those in favor? That passes unanimously with Mr. Van Buren being excused. We'll now move on to item number 6, an ordinance amending Provo City Code to increase the height limit for assisted living facilities in the low-density residential zone. This will be presented by Dustin Wright.
All right, thank you. So this item is a request by an applicant to amend the LDR zone that currently allows for 30-foot tall buildings, structures to go increase to 40 feet for an assisted living facility that it has 200 feet difference or separation from a detached residential home. The map here shows the existing LDR zones throughout the city. The one at the top is where the applicant had developed an assisted living facility on a portion of a property at 4200 North University Avenue. And at this time, they're requesting the ordinance amendment to allow for, as they move on to phase 2 of that development, that it will be able to be 3 stories instead of 2 stories. And that's why they're requesting this height increase to allow for that. The other LDR zones shown on the map here are sites where they've recently been developed, very recently, or are being constructed on those sites. And that 200-foot buffer that would be part of this ordinance amendment would apply to those. And so there really wouldn't be much if of those sites seeing an impact with this change. There wouldn't be a change seen there on existing sites. So this next map here shows that 4200 North site on University Avenue where the assisted living facility was developed, and then that vacant portion is where the phase 2 would go. If you look at the surrounding areas on there on the east and west, there's detached single-family residents that are well outside of that 200-foot buffer. To the south of it, there's some townhomes, twin homes, and triplexes that were part of phase 1. Those are closer than the 200-foot buffer would be, and so that's why the applicant is requesting that there'd be the that it's for detached single-family homes. With those there, they're within the 200 feet, but they're still a good 100 feet away from where the proposed site would be developed. The surrounding properties on the east sit up much higher on a bluff. You can see it better here from this street view. So this is looking east from University Avenue, and the homes up on the bluff there are set much higher, and there's a substantial vegetation buffer in between those. Some of the questions that came up in our work meeting earlier today, I can address some of those. With the LDR zone and its nature, I think with that 200-foot buffer, that really helps a site like this still be able to be compatible with surrounding zoning that there might be if it were a zone that's other than a residential structure or something adjacent to it. With that 200-foot setback, that's still going to allow for an adequate buffer to mitigate the impact, which is the height in this case, the increase in height. The wording that the applicant has requested is that it's from an adjacent structure as opposed to a property line or something like that. Again, that's what the applicant submitted, and I think it works for the purposes and intent of allowing it to work on this site, but making sure that perhaps in other sites where it might not be needed or wanted at this time, that it wouldn't apply. So I think that still works, but they could address some more reasoning behind that as well. There was some concerns brought up in the Planning Commission and meeting about the standard land use codes that are that regulate what types of uses are allowed, and with the assisted living and a drug rehab situation that occurred somewhere else in the city with that. On this site, that wouldn't apply. The standard land use code that was used on this site was different than the one that was a concern by that person in the Planning Commission hearing. This would be, this amendment also doesn't change anything. That it's just an amendment to the height and not the use within that zone. So if, I think I've addressed some of those. I know the applicant is here and could address those as well. But if there's any other questions for me, I'd be happy to answer those.
Mr. Connect.
So in regards to what was brought up about what happened in another neighborhood, and I know it's kind of apples and oranges, but can you give me any kind of short response on how the assisted living centers in like Lakewood neighborhood turned into drug rehab or whatever they are now? How did that happen? And did it happen in a way that kind of goes against normal zoning? I mean, could they have just come into that neighborhood with existing zoning, or did they get a special permit or dispensation?
I think when that specific site was approved, the standard land use code that was applied had a drug rehab as part of that or something. In this case, on this other site, it's the business license SLU code that was granted for it was for like a rest home type of a facility, and so it would be a completely separate one than where that issue happened. That's been brought to our attention, and so I think we're making sure that there's proper things in place to make sure that that doesn't happen with future SLU codes.
Thank you.
With regard to that, aren't there things that the city has no control over with regard to those type of facilities also?
Yeah, so an assisted living facility is actually allowed in any zone already, or any residential zone and some of the other zones throughout the city. And so I think the problem was just with whatever SLU code was used on that one, however many years back. I don't know the full history on it, but yeah, as far as assisted living facilities or anything like that, that's a permitted use in these residential zones already. And so this ordinance amendment is just talking about the height and not should an assisted living facility be allowed on this site. So,
thank you. Any other questions for Dustin at this, George?
I'm just curious what the reasoning, I think you mentioned a little bit about this earlier, but what the reasoning for the application is.
Yeah, so the applicant is looking to develop their next phase on their property there. They would like to go to 3 stories instead of 2 stories. So they need that additional height to be able to do that.
Why is that? Why do they want 3 instead of 2?
That'd be a good question you could ask the applicant. They haven't stated that.
One more question I've got. The way this is worded right now, from what I understand from the reading, this would only apply to this particular unit. All the other LDR situations in our city would not be able to comply with the restrictions that are put on this. Is that correct?
Yeah, based on where they are, what they're surrounded by, that 200-foot buffer would come into play and probably mitigate on the majority of those, just with that caveat. And then the other part of it is that they've been recently developed, and so they would have to go in there and change that to have an assisted living facility there. So it's very unlikely that any of the existing sites would have that, but it is changing the ordinance, the zone, so it's applicable to anything in that zone. But as far as likelihood of anything, I don't see that happening on any of those other sites.
Okay, thank you very much, Dustin. We'll open it to the applicant, Mr. Matt Swain from Perry Homes. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here. I'm Matt Swain. I represent the owner, Perry Homes, and wanted to share a few comments, answer questions, and give some history to the reasoning behind the application. Going back many years, we started working on this property with the neighbors and went through a very extensive process to come to what was essentially built and is existing today. We met with neighbors in their homes that discussed with us concerns about traffic impact, about view corridors, home teaching routes. You know, I mean, we really tried to cover the gamut of what the concerns were with the neighbors, and we spent a couple of years going through that process with many different iterations and came up with what we feel like is a beautiful community that's a real asset and has been very well accepted in the community, due, I think, in large part to that involvement with many of you that are still on the council here and neighbors and neighborhood chairs, and through your community process here in Provo. The project itself is very self-contained. As you drive through it, and that's by design, there were some concerns with cross-traffic in through the neighboring communities. That was one of the #1 priorities that we tried to implement into our design. And that has taken place. So the community right now is self-contained on its own roads that enter and exit from University Avenue. But for 5 single-family lots that are on 3900 North and directly connected to the neighborhood to the east of the project. Other than that, the roadways are completely contained on site and have no impact whatsoever on the adjoining communities. We also fought very hard for the lighted intersection that is now existing next to the charter school, which was a real blessing, I think, to the charter school. They were dropping off and picking up students on University Avenue, and it was an extreme health hazard. Right now, the families and parents that pick up their kids can come onto the road that we built around the community. They can park on the side of the road, pick up their students, and exit safely through the lighted intersection on University Avenue. We also agreed to help beautify Lover's Lane. We spent quite a bit of time and money taking out a lot of the overgrowth along Lover's Lane. We put down a new layer of road base to help improve that as an amenity to the community, as well as putting our best foot forward in creating an asset inside and out that matches the community that we developed in. We understand the high standards of Provo, particularly of that location within Provo. And we feel like we put our best foot forward. We spent the dollars necessary to develop a community that's been well received and fits well in its surroundings. We have, like I said, it was a long process to get there, and I think over the years we've built up some goodwill. We've hosted many community events there. I think we've had some city events hosted there, neighborhood events, and we've really tried to invite the neighborhood into that community and be a good neighbor that way, and look to do that down the road. Regarding the application itself, we've been working with the neighbors, first of all. I spoke directly with some of the council members as well and let them know kind of what our plans were. I'm sorry, Kay's not here tonight. He's one that I ran this past and wanted his input initially. We've always been very transparent and open in how we do business in Provo, and because of that, we've started very early on having those communications with a number of members of the City Council, but primarily and probably more importantly, the neighborhood. We had a meeting hosted at the community on February 15th where we invited 3 adjoining neighborhoods to come. The neighborhood chairs are here tonight. We told them what our plans were, that we needed to go to 3 stories. We showed them some very preliminary elevations of the proposed project and how that would be a continuation of the project that is currently there. And there was a vote taken, and there was a unanimous approval to allow us to move forward to start working with staff and the Planning Commission on our proposal. From that point, we worked with staff to try to organize verbiage that would be acceptable within the city and very limiting on the overall impact, understanding that a rezone it impacts the entire city code. We recognize that, and so we structured it very specifically to limit that. If you were to look at it kind of on a graph, you start out with the LDR zone, which is pretty limited already within city limits, and then we took it down to the assisted living use within that zone, and then we took it further down with that limitation of spacing between single-family structures. And so we ended up, we felt like, with a very, very minimal impact citywide by the application that we're suggesting tonight. We met with Planning Commission, so we got approval by staff, and then got a unanimous vote through Planning Commission as well on this application. And to answer a couple of questions, I don't know if we need to spend a lot of time on this, but it's been brought up in past meetings about this being changed into a drug rehab facility. I think there's obviously limitations within the LDR zone for that to occur. From the private sector perspective, that's impossible with a lender involved. If there's a loan on an asset like this, it's an impossible feat to change the use that dramatically. The lender would not allow that to happen. Furthermore, we're designing this as a housing community. This is not intended in any way to change uses at any time in the future. We develop and design these assets to hold very long term. That's our methodology. Our philosophy is to design and develop it for our own portfolio and to stay the owner of this asset for a very long time. So we put our name on these properties, and we take that very seriously. And if there's any way that we can commit any further than that we won't change it in a drug rehab facility, I'd be happy to do that. If there's some process by which that can occur within the city to quell any concerns there whatsoever. We look at this, Councilman Hanley, you asked the question as to why are we requesting this? And the answer is really twofold. One is we feel like the proper land use and land planning is more dense in certain locations. For these types of housing needs, the need for this is becoming more and more great within your community. We could spend an hour talking about the statistics of the baby boomers and their housing needs and the demands that they have and what they're looking for and how they want to live. We've talked with numerous folks in the community that say, kind of jokingly, but kind of seriously, saying, gosh, we're glad you're here because I'm going to live there someday, and I don't want to leave my neighborhood. This community is aging, particularly the community in which we're located, and there's a significant need now and a growing demand in the near future that's coming for this type of housing. So this would be an independent housing wing to the community that we've already developed. We have assisted living, we have memory care. And so independent would allow somebody to move into the community and basically age in place without having to leave the community and their friends and family and neighbors. They can come in, get the services that they need, and be able to age through the community and receive all those services that would be necessary as they needed them. Right now, we don't have that opportunity to provide that type of housing. It's simply assisted living and memory care at this time. So that's the first rationale behind it. The second is financial. We're a private developer. We develop for profit. I've been very clear and transparent with both the neighbors and those that I've met with that, frankly, the rates that we received on the first phase are significantly less than what we thought we would be getting. They're actually lower than a facility in South Jordan that's 25 years old. Salt Lake County, their rates are just significantly higher than Utah County for whatever reason. We've kind of boiled it down, honestly, to Provo, they hold on to their elders longer. They take care of them, they bring them into their homes. It's different here in Utah County than it is in Salt Lake County. And that's, I think, reflective of what's happening within our facility. We opened it 3 years ago. Excuse me. And we are not quite stabilized. We're not quite to the point now still where we can get a long-term loan on the facility, which is about a year behind where we thought we would be. The construction costs have increased dramatically. The rental rates have not increased proportionate to those costs. And so, frankly, for us to be able to develop the next phase, we need 3 stories to have it be viable. And that's what I've shared in the past, and that's the honest truth. Without the extra height and therefore density, it's not financially viable. And I think that that's going to be the case more as you go down the road, as you're looking at more dense projects within your city limits. These densities are going to be necessary for these projects to be viable because of construction costs and labor, materials, and land. Everything is getting much more expensive in our little communities. It's kind of sad to see that we've grown so much, but that's really where we're at. That's a very brief and broad description of why I'm here tonight. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have and clarify anything that you have on your minds.
Appreciate your candor. Mr. Sewell.
So, Mr. Swain, you mentioned an increase in density, and I assume that would involve a change in the development agreement. Do you know what you'll be asking for as far as the number of, or what the number of units would go to?
Each floor approximately that we're looking at is about 40 units per floor, so it'd be about 40 units. I couldn't tell you exactly what the net difference is from the development agreement, but I would guess it's around 30 to 40 units.
Thank you.
What's your occupancy now in the phase? Do you know what it is?
Yeah, we're hovering around 89 to 90%, and even at those levels, we're not able to finance out of that project. So, the threshold. Not to get into the weeds too much about the financial model, because we're not really here to discuss, I think, profitability of projects, et cetera, but there's some backstory here. The overhead of running these communities is absolutely astronomical. I mean, we have a huge amount of overhead with the food and the nursing and the on-site cleaning, and it is like running a restaurant, a hotel, and a small business all within the same community. And so those margins, you have to get up to a very high occupancy to make any profit at all. And so at 90%, we're still waiting. We'll probably still be another 6 months before we're able to take out our construction loan, which we've had to extend multiple times now. So that's probably more information, but that's honestly where we're at.
Thank you. And Mr. Connect.
So I was talking to Brian, but did I hear that you do have currently a development agreement with the city?
We do. Yeah, there was one entered into with the original phase. That's correct.
Right, and so, and I'd been asking him, gee, is there any way to put in the development agreement that it's just going to be exactly what you say it's going to be, a assisted living facility going forward?
Yeah.
And the reason I bring that up is the two that we saw change. I believe they went out of business, they maybe went bankrupt, whatever, and they'd been there for 20, 30, who knows how many years. And then when they restarted, it was a totally different thing.
Yeah. I'd be happy to add that to the development agreement if that's a concern of the city council. I have no issues with that whatsoever.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Swin.
Thank you.
We'll be back here with you in a second. We will now open this. We have 3 neighborhood chairs here. I can see to address to this. Mr. Rosen, we'll start with you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate your time.
Hi, I'm Dave Rosen. I'm a resident of Provo, and I'm the Riverbottoms Neighborhood Chair, which is where this facility is located. And as Matt has indicated, this started long before this latest little phase that's coming along. And the neighbors have been informed about it for quite some time. In fact, that probably added to the fact that we didn't have a whole lot at the February 15th meeting. By having a northeast area, we combined with the other neighborhoods in the area, both up on top of the bluff and down in the Riverbottoms. And we had 50-plus people that were there at that meeting, which only represented about 1% of the Riverbottoms neighborhood. As was mentioned, we reviewed the plans. They seemed consistent. The request for the additional height did not bother those that were in attendance. They felt that this facility was still well enough below the bluff that it was not going to block the view of those above. Those that came had a chance to voice their opinion in that way as well. From the neighborhood standpoint, we feel that there's a nice balance that has been selected here. We recognize that other neighborhoods may be concerned about the LDR zone change, but with the 200 feet setback and also the restriction on assisted living centers, we feel that those mitigate the risks and the possibilities and concerns for the others. As you saw in the development, Perry Homes is developing the twin and tri homes that are right there next to the facility. If you look at those, many of those face away from the building or face down the corridors, down the roads, and down the parking lot areas, so that they are not losing their view even though they're closer than 200 feet. At the Planning Commission, we had several of the neighborhoods express concern that they were glad to see that something was going to fill up the weed patch right now. So again, most of the neighborhoods are very positive about it. Many of us who live in those neighborhoods have our parents that reside in those facilities, and they have been a good neighbor, and they have invited and been very open to the community and welcoming the neighborhood to be a part of what they're doing and developing. And so we have no concerns and recommend that it be granted.
Thank you, Mr. Rosen. Is there any questions for Mr. Rosen before we invite the others up? Mr. Sewell.
Mr. Rosen, do you happen to know if there were any residents in those twin homes right next to where the proposed project will be that were represented at the meeting, or have you heard from any of them?
There were, yes. Gary Robinson was represented not only at the meeting, but was in front of the Planning Commission. And he's one of those, and he's one of the newer residents in those twin homes that is okay with what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosen. Appreciate your effort on this.
My name is Sharon Memmott. I'm from the Edgemont neighborhood. Marion Monahan had a previous commitment and asked me to express her concerns, and mine echo hers. We love this project. They have been good neighbors. We appreciate them inviting us into their facility for some of our neighborhood meetings. Mostly our concern, backtrack. We love this project specifically for where it's at, because it's on the main corridor of the city, because of the geography I don't feel like the height change will really be an issue at all. Our main concern is, especially due to efforts in the past to make changes to complete blocks and areas to change them to LDR, MDR, and HDR, we're concerned about making this broad change to the city code just to fit one project. We do appreciate that the specifics that you've added that kind of help mitigate some of that concern, but wondered if there's not some way to do it as a pro zone or something more specific to this project. We don't want you to deny this project in any way, but if you could somehow change the wording so that they can go forward, but alleviate some of our concerns as to the sweeping changes to a whole area. Thanks.
My name's Mike Rohn, and I'm the Riverside Neighborhood Chair. Ecclesiastically, my church responsibility is actually to work every Sunday in the current property that's there, the Legacy Village that is the not independent care, which this new facility will be, but the residential care facility and then enhanced care facility. We currently, because I'm the clerk of that unit, have consistently between about 115 and 120 residents. We have a turnover rate annually of about 35 to 40, due primarily to death. And we are enjoying providing religious services there. And my only concern is that with the increased density and population that this third story is going to require or generate, I'm concerned about the parking. I don't think there's adequate parking. Sometimes with the current facility, when we have Sunday activities, all the parking slots adjacent to University Avenue are full. I believe some of those are intended to be used for residents of the new expansion. We think it will be a great addition to our city and to the northern part of the city. I think it will probably require the creation ecclesiastically of another unit to deal with the residents of this expansion. But we think it's a great addition to the city, and that's my only concern is there going to be adequate parking when it's fully populated with the current residents and visitors, because we have a lot of family members that come to visit, particularly on Sundays, and eat and attend church and do those things with the residents there. Thank you.
Before you go, Mike, parking issues, is that on
I
University
haven't
Avenue?
looked at it closely. It's not on University. Their parking structure parallels University.
Yes.
And it's that parking lot that parallels University Avenue that on Sundays is generally pretty full with the current residents and the visitors that come on Sunday.
How about the parking up behind the facility on the street? Have you noticed
We
that?
don't generally have parking on the east side of the facility, but the parking on the west side, that lot is generally pretty full on Sundays.
Okay.
It's not so full during the week, but then most of the people in our facility are non-drivers.
Thank you. Mr. Swain, parking, tell us, would you mind addressing that?
Sure. So parking, I think that will certainly be brought up in the site planning approval process. I mean, this is kind of the first step, and then we would be coming back with the site plan approval. And we have done some rough site planning, as I had mentioned, and looked at those calculations. We feel like we fit within the code parameters of the city currently. The road that wraps up around the community is designed and was developed wide enough to accommodate parallel parking along there, which is not used. So we feel like we can accommodate the parking for this use, and would be happy to work with staff and the Planning Commission as we go through site plan approval to assure that happens.
Okay, thank you. And again, that will come back to the council, because it sounds like there's going to be requests for changes to the development agreement. This has nothing to do with that at this time. All we're dealing with is the height issue, and that issue will be addressed later.
Yes.
Mr. Connect?
So you mentioned changes to the development agreement, so any change that we talked about that might kind of limit the future use would be addressed later when we're looking at the development agreement rather than now?
Yes, there would have to be some amendments to that development agreement to have to address the project that they have in mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
One other thing, if I may, that I failed to mention during my opening comments is that there was a concern by two neighbors that live up on the hill expressed in the Planning Commission hearing. You may have seen that if you watched the video. I went on record to say that we'd be happy to donate some funds to help continue the beautification of Lover's Lane that's now part of the Provo City Park and Rec property, so we don't own that anymore. We've deeded that over to the city. But we'd be happy to dedicate or donate some funds to help beautify that with some trees and some landscaping that might make that a more usable amenity.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I just interject, and I apologize for possibly speaking out of turn because I haven't been involved in the previous discussions about this that community development has, so I may be missing something here. But as that exchange just happened, it strikes me as a little bit odd to change the law before amending the development agreement if the reason for changing the law is to allow a development that can't happen without the development agreement also being amended. So it seems to me as a matter of process that it would make more sense to amend the development agreement first, because if you couldn't reach a negotiated amendment to it, then there would be no point in changing the citywide ordinance. But again, I may be missing something in saying that.
Could I comment on that? I think the purpose that we've taken this process is to go through the site plan approval, which I see that occurring with the development agreement modification. Those would be happening simultaneously. To go through the site plan approval process, it's an extremely time-consuming and expensive process because we have to essentially develop a whole set of plans. And so this process is a legislative action that we can do through the process we're doing tonight. The site plan approval process is very costly and time-consuming. And so we felt like this would be the proper order to move forward. If we have the LDR zone modification to allow the height, then therefore we can take the next step. I can say that with, and then obviously the legislative action still has control over to approve or not approve the development agreement or the site plan approval based off of the code parameters that we would have to develop and design to.
Mr. Jones, would it be possible to put in some sort of clause that this text amendment would not become effective unless or until that was successfully done, and if that does not happen in a certain time period, then it expires?
Sure, we do that routinely with our zone changes. This is a little bit different because of the fact that it's a text amendment and we don't usually do development agreements with those. But but I don't see any reason why we couldn't include language in the boilerplate at the end of the ordinance that dictates the effective date of the ordinance, that says that the effective date is after execution of the development agreement that's been contemplated.
Mr. Stewart?
I have a concern that this is citywide. To make an exception for your development, not knowing what the unintended consequences are citywide is troubling to me. I'll probably vote against it.
Okay, any other comment, any questions? We're still going to open this for public comment. And just for council's information, this item meets the qualifications that this would be a routine item and we could take action on this tonight. Should any single council member request that this be delayed till the next meeting, that would be appropriate. But let's have Well, before we even have it to public comment, is there any council members that are concerned about this enough that they would like to continue this for 2 weeks?
I think my thoughts on that would depend on how the discussion goes. So at this point, I'm not ready to say that, yes, I would like it continued for 2 weeks, but I'd like to keep that option open.
Mr. Sewell?
Ditto on that.
Okay, then we will continue with the process here and invite anyone from the public to come forward about this, to discuss this. Seeing no public comment, then we've heard from our neighborhood chairs. We'll bring it back for council discussion. And we'll start with Mr. Sewell.
First of all, I have to say, having been quite involved in this project back several years ago, the way this turned out far exceeded my hopes and expectations for how this would go. I think this project has been a wonderful asset to our community. It's a beautiful facility. Everyone I talk to that is either a resident there or knows a resident there just feels like it's a wonderful facility. They've opened their doors to us for community and neighborhood events. So I love the project. I think it's remarkable that you got unanimous support from all of the people that showed up at the meeting, at the neighborhood meeting. That's great. However, so I'm supportive of the project. I'd like to see it move ahead. I don't feel like this is the right vehicle to make that happen. I'm concerned about changing the height in the LDR zone, even though it's narrowly tailored. I think that opens the door to changing the height for other types of facilities. So my thought, and this was kind of sparked by a comment Mr. Harding made earlier today, is since there already is a development agreement that's going to limit the density, that does limit the density and would limit the density, why not simply rezone this MDR, use the development agreement to control the density as it's being done now, and if the developer was willing, put in a clause to limit the height to 40 feet, which is only slightly lower than the height for the MDR and would match what the current height limit is for the LDR. So that's kind of what I'm wondering. I'd be interested to hear what staff's thoughts on that would be as an approach that would sidestep this issue of creating potential side effects in other areas of the city down the road.
Could I ask a question about that? Yeah. I mean, my question about that would be, why wouldn't that create a similar kind of problem for MDR citywide? I mean,
I'm not proposing changing the MDR zone, just rezoning this one spot to be MDR. So there'd be no change to the...
But you were saying to 40 feet.
MDR is allowed 40 feet.
It's allowed 45 feet. And so I was just suggesting, again, this has to be proffered by the developer, but if that extra 5 feet was a concern, then they could proffer to limit it to 40 feet, which would be the same as what they're asking for now.
But then there wouldn't be a legal restriction if they wanted to go higher.
Well, in the development agreement.
Development agreement, I see. Yeah. I mean, I'm just having a hard time seeing. It seems to me that the restrictions placed on the LDR here are so specific that I can't. It doesn't seem likely to me that there's going to be any ramifications that we're not seeing, but maybe I'm missing something.
Mr. Harding.
Let me echo what Mr. Sewell said.
If you're going to echo that, can we get a response on that? Do you want to take something first? Okay.
I mean, starting out, rather than repeating what Mr. Sewell said, I wanted to just kind of mention that from all reports, this is a wonderful project, and I had a few more concerns earlier, but the discussion has resolved several of those concerns. My only remaining concern is about the nature of the LDR zone, and are we making changes to, you know, what at the core is what the LDR zone was for, and if we're morphing a part of the LDR zone to be basically MDR. Much has been said about, well, you know, yes, we're putting in all of these tailored exceptions to make sure that this only applies in this one spot, but that's actually I think my biggest concern is that we're taking what can be relatively straightforward zoning. Like, you know, if you want something that looks like LDR, you zone it LDR. If you want something that looks like MDR, you zone it MDR, and it's fairly straightforward. But then we start saying, well, this is LDR, but we're going to start making all these tweaks to add exceptions for this one project. And pretty soon our code gets fairly bloated and convoluted and difficult to follow. So I actually, you know, I have some problems that we are carving out a very explicit exception for this one thing, when it sounds to me, and I could be wrong. I mean, I'd look to the staff for this, but it seems to me that what they're trying to do is MDR, and so I think I would rather, you know, spot zone it MDR if that's what we're trying to achieve, rather than take LDR and tweak it to the point that this fits here but nowhere else. So that's just the approach is what I'm concerned about.
Gary?
Mr. Stewart.
Amen.
Okay.
Exactly what my feelings are.
Dave?
Yeah, I would agree that it's setting precedent. If someone else came back and said, well, you know, you did it for this type of project, you know, if that kind of height is okay for A, why is it not okay for B? Well, it's not okay for anything in that zone. So let's just not do that zone. Let's rezone it MDR and use the development agreement to do the restrictions that we need to give us the safeguards. And so if we do a rezone, like Brian was saying, typically when you do a rezone, you may have a development agreement, and heck, we already have one in place. We just need to modify it at the same time as we rezone it.
I see Brian and Dustin consulting, and wondered if there's any comments from them as our staff. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess is the question about MDR versus LDR, is that what you're asking, or?
Do we fit the project in, and then if they want to proffer, if we choose an MDR, and they choose to proffer a development agreement that reflects several of the things that they've talked about, can we make that fit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that could work. I haven't reviewed it to see how it would fit with an MDR zone. If, you know, you mentioned 4 stories earlier, you know, so something in the MDR zone would have to be restricted there. So then you're making sure you have to cover all those things, I guess, in the development agreement. I don't know if that would be, Mr. Jones, I don't know if that would be the existing development agreement or if that would be a new one as part of rezoning it to the MDR zone.
Well, we could do it either way. We could, we'd have to look at the agreement and just see which would be easier, but we could easily enter into an amended development agreement that just updates everything according to the new zone, or we could enter into a new development agreement that supersedes the old one. I don't think it really makes much difference.
How binding is the development agreement? I mean, if the developer changes, or let me understand the difference.
I'm supposed to ask that question in this meeting. No, I'm just kidding. Well, that's been the debate about development agreements for the past several years, right? I mean, the entire idea of them is that they are completely binding, and if we didn't think that they were, we would never enter into them because they would be useless. Having said that, they're not perfect tools, and we have discussed in past council meetings the fact that they on occasion are forgotten. Institutional knowledge of the fact that they exist is lost or erodes over time. And so they are, I would say, logistically more difficult to enforce than straight statutes or ordinances because they are because they don't reside in the same place. But they serve a different purpose, right? They serve a purpose of providing additional restrictions when the ordinances themselves are not accurate and cannot be fixed accurately in time to place the restrictions that you want.
So I'm just trying to weigh the comparative reliability of these two options and the unforeseen consequences of both of them, and I still feel like what we have on the table right now is more reliable than rezoning this as MDR and coming into an agreement to restrict the height when down the road that could change entirely, and you're stuck with a zoning that allows for taller structures than you want and so on.
Well, it's a matter. I don't think the height is really an issue. It's more about other issues, right? Because the
height is an issue for the neighbors here. I mean, it seems to me that it's a different story if we're talking 35, 40, 45 feet.
No, but what I mean by that when I say that the height is an issue is that I think you arrive at the same height by either solution, right? I think you either arrive at 40 feet through the proposed amendment, but you now, then the question is, what is the unintended consequence of also allowing that height everywhere in the city, right? Or you arrive at the same height by going with the MDR and the development agreement. And from a legal perspective, I suppose the only unintended consequence concern in my mind of that, as far as height goes, is there a possibility that maybe somebody forgets that the development agreement ever existed and so it never gets enforced? Possibly, but at that point you've already got the building built, right? I mean, so the only way that the height restriction even gets violated is if somebody comes along and builds an extra 5 feet onto the already 40-foot building.
But that's my point.
Well, but I guess we've heard, I'm not a builder, but I think we've heard in multiple council meetings before this that that's not a logistical possibility. But I can't speak to whether that's true or not.
I don't know. I just feel like we're looking at sixes. I mean, I don't think it's a logistical possibility that in every LDR zone in the city there's going to be an assisted living center that's within less than 200 feet from single-family homes.
Clearly not, and I can't speak to that. I guess the question is, might there be in one?
I mean, why don't we just add and developed by someone by the name of Mr. Swain and see, make it really specific.
I think those are legitimate policy questions, and in my mind, I don't have, I think those are policy questions to be answered rather than legal ones. I would say that it is more common, in my experience, for us to overzone and restrict by development agreements than it is to open up changes zone-wide to accommodate one project.
I would just like to echo Brian's analysis. I've been around for a lot of development agreements, and what he says is correct, that we use that to kind of rein in whatever is allowed and restrict it. And we have talked in our, I believe, in DAPR or one of our meetings about having our plat maps marked if there is a development agreement so it's not lost in the shuffle. And I remember when there was a piece of property up by the Tent View High that has a development agreement on it, and someone bought it and wanted to do something different with that property. And believe me, the residents of the neighborhood have a really long memory. And it was like, you are not going to change that development agreement. What you're proposing is not appropriate. And so we didn't change it. So I've never seen one, well, I shouldn't say, maybe there is an example, Brian, of, well, something getting lost in the shuffle, but there is that fear. But I think as we look at our process to better document it, that it is better for us to go with MDR rather than to say we're going to make an exception for height on one use in this zone and open the door for other uses to come in and say, well, I want to build an apartment building where regular people live at that same height because they're just as deserving as the seniors.
Any other comments? Mr. Stewart.
Brian, thank you for articulating our views so well.
Well, I feel like for the sake of, what's that? I was going to say, for the sake of clarity, I think I need to say, because others have heard me say it before, that I don't necessarily love development agreements. I think that there are problems with them. But in this particular instance, it's a question of analyzing the cons of each situation, which is, and like I said, I think that's a policy question for you to decide, which is the possible cons of having a citywide ordinance that you don't like, or the possible cons of a development agreement perhaps not being enforced.
Do we go back and talk about process then? And Mr. Maxfield, do you want to address this for a minute?
Well, if I can put together a couple of things it sounds like you're talking about. One of those was to approve the amendment subject to the site plan and the other things coming forward. You could seemingly attach the request to change it to an MDR at the same time. That would allow staff to give you better analysis than I think we can give you tonight to the benefits of an MDR zone. That way would give the applicant an impetus to at least go forward in their planning, to bring that forward. And in reality, it would all be heard together at the same time, whether you're doing a rezoning, if you decide to do it to MDR, or if you say, let's implement the change we just proposed tonight and adopt the new development agreement to tie into that. It kind of delays the inevitable, but it allows the developer to go forward, I guess, is what I was thinking of.
Mr. Harding.
Fascinating suggestion, and I think I'm open to that. I think I like that idea. I do want to say though, we're throwing around MDR, but I don't know that MDR is the right tool. I would like the staff to look at all the tools you have in your toolbox and say, maybe it's a R3. Well, I don't know what it is, a pro zone or whatever. But if I think you've heard us that our concern is about carving out exceptions in the LDR. So if you could find, maybe it's the MDR, maybe it's something different, but a tool that we're not carving out narrow exceptions. But if that's as part of, I've never seen that before, so I'm a little bit hesitant, but some sort of rider on it that says, basically we're approving this motion, but with some, I need a lot of help on that.
Doesn't take effect until, I'm turning Brian Jones. I'll go on the legal end on this one.
I'm not in favor of approving the motion, because that allows a MDR, or allows 40 in an LDR zone.
Except that wouldn't take effect until these other things occurred.
We don't want it to take effect.
We don't want it to take effect.
And it wouldn't take effect. Well, yeah, at least that would put it to that other meeting of which you just, where you could decide which one was the better approach if that's what you wanted to do.
So the other option would be for one of us or multiple of us to indicate that we'd like this continued for 2 weeks, and then that would give 2 weeks for staff to look. Mm-hmm. But the suggestion was interesting, and I wouldn't mind seeing what that would look like. But if the rest of the council is uncomfortable with that, I'm fine with postponing or continuing this for 2 weeks.
Mr. Sewell?
I'd like to make a motion that we continue this to our next meeting and ask staff to bring us a vehicle, whether it be MDR zone or a pro zone, that would allow this project to go forward without affecting, without changing the characteristics of our current zones. Does that make sense?
Does it make sense to you two? That's the whole thing that we're concerned about here.
It does. It gives us time to analyze that. And I think the other for Mr. Swain is trying to give him confidence to start the engineering process, which gets expensive and everything else. And that was one of the concerns, that there seems to be encouragement, but again, that's not a vote, so I don't know, how to take that. But that's the only thing we have to look at that way. We're assuming what we're trying to do is build in that 40-foot height.
In being through the process before, and my biggest concern was with the neighborhood and the way they would react to this. It's not often that a city will change a development agreement. In fact, I asked, and I can only think of one time that we've done that, and we're about to consider it with the Arbors. But I just don't know of many times that we actually change a development agreement. But this project has been very successful, and if the neighborhood, in my mind, if they're supportive of it, I personally like the project. And my biggest concern had to do with the neighborhood going forward, and I appreciate the efforts that have been made by the developer and the neighborhoods to come together and have a discussion about this.
Well, if you're looking for affirmative support, I mean, I think I haven't heard anybody say they don't think this project should go forward. I think it should go forward. I'm content to vote for it as is, but if the rest of the council feels that looking at these other tools is the better way to go, that's fine. But I don't think the message here is that I didn't hear any serious reservations from the neighbors. I didn't hear any serious reservations here, except for this particular problem of which tool we're using. So it's not the project itself that's of any concern to me, and I don't think to anyone else.
Yeah, I think we understand that, though.
Mr. Stewart.
If you come back with a proposal that says that we're putting 40-foot height in an LDR zone, I'm going to have to vote against it. So I hope you understand at least that's my position.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, we do have one councilman that's asked that this be continued for 2 weeks. That makes it automatically happen. Unless we have a...
Well, I think there was an affirmative motion, and the motion did more than just continue it. It made a specific request of staff. So I think I would look to see if that was seconded and then vote on it if there's a second.
Then we will ask for a motion. Would you please restate your motion and then ask for a second then? That will be...
Okay, the motion was to continue until our next meeting and ask staff to bring us a recommendation on a vehicle that would allow the project to move forward with the requested height of 40 feet, with a zoning vehicle that would not involve changing the definitions of our current zones. I mean, I guess unless the recommendation is pro zone, and then I'm not sure if that.
Is there a second for that motion? Okay, we'll go with Mr. Connect for the second on that one. Any discussion on the motion?
Again, if it isn't clear already, I'm highly supportive of this project moving ahead, and it's just the vehicle that is my concern. So.
And even if it came down to a pro zone, I don't consider that really changing an existing zone.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, I'll call for a vote. Those in favor? That passes unanimously with Mr. Van Buren being excused. Good luck and thank you. We look forward to hearing back on this soon. We will now move on to item number 7, an ordinance amending a Provo City Code regarding allowing a motorcycle parking count to count towards vehicle parking requirements in the Arbors on the Avenue Pro Zone. It's in the Riverbottoms neighborhood, and Brian Maxfield will present this.
Thank you. If you recall, this item was continued from your last meeting. Discussion at that time seemed to go beyond the motorcycle parking, was really a point of, is there a future traffic signal that's going to be in place on University Avenue, and is there an allowance for interconnectivity between the Arbors and Canyon Brook condominiums to the south? We were hoping to have someone here to represent tonight. We haven't been able to do that, but we did get emails back and forth. There is indeed an agreement between the state and the city that a future light could go into that area once it's warranted. Warranted, again's the operative word. And so that being the case, then it would seem to open up the possibilities if the applicant's desirable to at least create the possibility of opening up that southern side. We discussed that would require removing up to 3 parking spaces, and access would possibly go through their site. And he's here to speak to this tonight. I believe last time I spoke with him, he was in agreement. However, there were concerns, obviously, as to the internal costs, and I think the council brought that up at the last meeting also. How would that eventually be paid for to make those changes? There is a slight grade change between the property to the south and the Arbors, so that have to go through the properties that way. Other changes would have to be made because of the drive through that. I don't think it's insurmountable. I think it's just something everyone would have to look at and decide if that's doable. And again, it would involve the larger HOA organization of Arbors 1 and Arbors 2. So have to have that agreement and probably Canyon Brook. It should state Canyon Brook on their south side has a road which goes up, which was designed to provide access to a future small commercial area there at the corner of 4800 North and University Parkway. Conceivably, once that commercial area goes in, those residents could wind through that area and go out to 4800 as a second alternative. As part of the agreement for that road, was agreed to put a gate so that commercial users could not then drive back through Canyon Brook. So there are a couple of little things in there that we'd all have to discuss, and it'd be a longer time period than certainly tonight, and I don't think that the intent was to settle this tonight, but the idea, could we indeed allow some kind of alternative development to connection to occur with the owners being able to discuss that further and see if they can come to agreement on that, but still be able to move forward with their project with the motorcycle amendment. Any questions?
So in a normal everyday project, what is the allowance for or ratio for motorcycle parking?
There isn't really one that's allowed and required. It's just, you can put in motorcycle parking, but does not count as a required parking space. So if you have excess spaces or excess area, you can put that in. We've certainly discussed there should be something maybe to each project, especially bicycle parking, other kinds of transportation that way, but this has kind of created that discussion. Again, we didn't want to get into a citywide issue at this time because we feel there's a lot more to do, and we didn't want to hamper this development while waiting for the rest of it, the area to be discussed, but it should indeed be an active discussion, I believe.
So based on the fact there really is no standard and the fact that this standard is really seemingly reasonable, yeah, I'm not having a big problem with what they're asking for.
Mr. Harding.
So again, kind of catching us up from where we were a week ago, my understanding is that the request was for a 2-to-1 filling the requirement up to one of these conversions for every 25 required spaces. That was the request. The recommendation from staff and recommended as well by Planning Commission is the same thing except only at a 1:50 ratio.
Correct.
One of the questions that we had when discussing these broader questions, as you've articulated already, is the possibility that we would need to move to that 1:25 in order to cover some of this parking spaces that would be eliminated by making that interconnect. And so that's one thing that I'm looking for tonight is which of those, 1 out of 50 or 1 out of 25 would allow this to go forward. The one other consideration is I don't fully understand the position of the different people, and we're just kind of speculating, or at least a week ago I was speculating on what they may be interested in, but it seemed like the one thing that the city could kind of bring to the table is saying, we were planning on doing 1 out of 50, but we're willing to do, or maybe even, here's something that you want, and we're considering granting your request. What we would like is to see if you could work out something. And so by granting the the motorcycle parking counting towards the parking requirements, are we, giving away our bargaining chip? Are we throwing that in, and now that's off the table, I guess, or on the table, whichever way you want to look at it. Anyway, so that's I guess the one concern is which are we considering? 1 out of 25 or 1 out of 50, and then does it make sense to pass this now, or does it make sense to see if something can be worked out, and then pitching in to make that a workable solution?
I guess 2 points. One is they'd have to take out 3 spaces, so right off that means you'd have to have 6 motorcycle spaces to compensate for that. There is no other location where they can put a parking space, otherwise they wouldn't have needed the amendment. But they still have to make up 1 space, so you add those 2 in, then they'd have to have 8 total parking spaces. Now, if you're talking about the entire Arbors project, that may be possible, more likely. It is right on the edge or getting restrictive if it's just looked at as Arbors too. And the thought of staff was if we did go back to the 25, because it is limited just to this development. I know we just went over one of those issues. This one is a pro zone, so it is already set up that way. It really wouldn't affect anywhere else, so I don't think it would cause any harm to go to 21 to 25.
Mr. Sewell.
And so just to clarify, we're confident that that would give them enough flexibility with parking spaces to be able to put in this connection if they're able to?
Yeah, it would take compensation for those 3 spaces that would have to go out. We'd need that 24-foot wide aisle at least. 2 wouldn't give us that, 3 would. And so that's where we came up with that number. There are a number of places in the underground parking garage and in some other spots where motorcycle parking could be added. So we're fairly confident we can come up with that number of 8 to 10 if we could set that out. We could even have insets into the western side of the parking or do some other things creatively to create those spaces.
Mr. Connect.
So if we continue this for 2 weeks and have some discussion on the property owners, so we have a better idea if this is actually going to be agreeable.
Yeah, you do have Mr. Duchère here tonight, who's the applicant. He represents one of those, and he could probably give you some insight that way. It's a difficult thing, I think we talked about last time too, because it's hard to make the property owners give easements. And so that's the only hesitation I have is as long as you delay, it may never happen. I mean, if one of them decides not to do it, then that just tells us it's not going to happen. But whether or not that would change the amendment, I don't know. So.
Well, let's hear from the applicant for a minute now.
Hello, I'm Brady Ducher. I'm with Somerset Corp. First, let me talk about motorcycle parking in general. We originally figured that we wanted to do the citywide, and that was right when the new parking czar was coming on, and there was support for it. And then they said, you know what, it would take probably too long, so let's just limit this just to your pro zone. Our motivation for this is that we are one parking stall short of our requirement of 2.25 for the development. And so when the company brought me on to work there, I'm a motorcycle rider. I take a lot of heat because we have limited parking in my office up there. And so I park on the sidewalk, and then I get heat about that. And so then I park in an illegal spot, not illegal, it's this little tiny spot next to a tree, but my motorcycle's big, and so then it kind of takes up the spot, and so now I get heat about that. So there's never, as a rider, if you ride, you know you're always driving around with some kind of guilt because you put your bike into the left so another bike can come in that nobody does, and now you look like that. Or you want to, if you're a scooter rider, those just stack up straight up and down, so you can put those anywhere. And so they end up on sidewalks. And so I'm always thinking we should do motorcycle parking. I know there's motorcycle parking in other cities. If I ever go to the BYU Creamery, I ride my motorcycle because there's parking right there. And there's little teeny spots, and I take up 3 of them. But there's parking. I know all the places in the city where there's motorcycle parking. And if I'm going to go there, I ride my bike because it's right up front. It's usually next to the handicap, and it's awesome. So we thought if we're going to put motorcycle parking here, which I wanted to do, we don't have the parking to give, but there's going to be bikes with 68 units and then 50 next door to us. There are bikes in their parking garage right now. There's even a bike rack with bicycles in it. And so we originally thought, let's do motorcycle parking, and let's also have a credit for if we can provide a bike rack up off somewhere of 20 bikes, that counts as a parking spot too. But then we thought it's way up there, up too far north for people to be, reasonably be riding their bikes somewhere. So we thought, let's just limit it to motorcycle parking. We're okay with the 50 for every, so yeah, we're okay with that. And we originally said 25 because that's kind of what was in all the other cities that we looked at, it was 25. But we don't need that many parking spaces, and we don't know if we're going to be even using that many. And so we were just going to see how it went. We're going to stripe 2 for motorcycles and see how it went. And if we needed more, my idea was I wanted to put more in our underground so that in the wintertime they can just store them down there and they're just out of the way. And in the summertime they have awesome places to park right next to the building. I know Phase 1 has motorcycles and they need parking in there. But so as far as 25 or 50, it doesn't matter to us whether it's 25 or 50 because either one of them works. Maybe having it be a little bit more, maybe we'll need a lot of motorcycle parking, but right now that would give us 4 complete spaces, and that would be a lot of motorcycles. If actually we can get 5, so we would have a lot of motorcycles in there. I don't think we're going to have that many, but we are going to have some that are going to take up the spaces. As far as the development agreement, our concerns are that we've been approached this before, and our concerns are that the connection between the development to the south and ours would cut right, there's a grade change, it would cut right through our covered parking, and our agreement with the city is that we won't put our covered parking in the front of the building, it has to be on the sides, and so we've maxed that out. I did a development down the road, and we ended up, I was talking to Rux Roland at UDOT, and he was saying, and we used that entrance for our project as one of the examples of what he was saying, and it was, or what he was talking about, and he said, for instance, that cost this much money for us to get, and it was an exception because it's close to the light on the north, and the width of it is this wide, and so then, now my concern is if there's going to be a light there, is UDOT going to say, well, we'd like to widen that entrance, and so we don't know that in the future. Whenever they decide to do that, because we purposely put 2 lights. We only needed to put 4 along our front, and we put 6 because we wanted 2 lights at the entrance of our, right there. And then if we widen it, we lose more parking. And then we've got a dumpster drop right there that would possibly be lost. And so now we've got to find out where to put our covered parking, the dumpster, stretching that out to lose more parking. And so it's not going to be made up by motorcycle parking because I don't think there's going to be you know, just put more motorcycle parking, you'll have enough parking spaces, because I think we're going to start getting shy of our parking, you know. That's basically our concerns. I mean, we're willing to talk. We were willing to talk then. It's just it didn't work out with, you know, the timing of the development to our south, and how who's gonna pay for it, and how we're gonna get down the grade change. And now we've lost spots, and that's our covered parking. And so we have our building permits in place, and we're just waiting for our financing. And this parking issue was the last thing that we need to get over. And we figure we came up with a fantastic way of, if we can count motorcycle parking, we're more than there, and we're going to alleviate a lot more hassles with the motorcycles that are on site right now. I can answer any other questions, but that's, again, we're willing to talk. It's just going to be our HOA, the current Arbors HOA, the HOA for the development to the south, who's going to pay for it, when are they going to pay for it, and we're going to lose more than just a couple parking spaces, because it's going to be our covered parking, and I don't know how that would work out. So it's just more complicated, than, you know, but we're open to talking. It's just I don't know how to make a promise that it will make it happen with the challenges that, you know, doing it would cause.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. This item is open for neighborhood chairs. Let's start off with that.
Again, Dave Rosen, Riverbottoms Neighborhood. We did not hold a meeting on this particular one, but we did send out emails and solicit a response. Just a reminder from last time, our response was about 2%. Other than the HOA and the Arbors, the response was very positive to allow the motorcycle parking to replace the single car parking, to go ahead and grant them that. Chris Carr is here from the HOA, and he can read his, and we read that last time. You know their concerns. And the neighbors, though, were concerned about the safety, and they continue to be concerned about the safety more so than the motorcycle parking. And we know that we can't force developers into looking at that and coming to an agreement with that, but whatever can be done to grant safety in this area where we have multiple ingresses and egresses from both sides of the road coming into the very short footage area out into that medium. We need to consider that, and whatever can be arranged by the city with the developers, we as a neighborhood would appreciate that. So thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Rosen? Mr. Stewart.
Adding more units adds to the safety issue, and so you're okay with going ahead with additional units without the safety issue being addressed?
I don't think this issue has to do with more units being added on to the condo project. Those were already approved and in place.
Okay.
I think it would just maybe eliminate one unit because you're needing to have the parking for that last unit to be built. So it wouldn't be a big change in density, I don't believe.
You know, that's again up to the developer there if they're going to combine two of those units into one. I don't know what that capability is.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mike Rohn, I'm here in my role as the area representative for the Northeast area. Mr. Chairman, would you ask her to put up an aerial shot of the area we're talking about on North University Avenue? I would like to use the pointer to draw your attention to some safety factors that Captain Groskebauer was going to discuss, but after a 13-hour day, he asked to be excused.
Is that possible? Can we do that now? Okay.
I asked her earlier. Can you enlarge it just a little bit? And then, there you go. Our concern, down just a little. Right there, perfect. Our concern in the Northeast area has to do with safety. There's a red thing on here someplace, right? There we go. Has to do with with traffic. This intersection right here to go into the Canyon Brook apartments is right in, right out only, so people coming north can turn in and they can come out going north. But the only place they have to go across traffic in either direction is this exit right here. The difference between right here and right here is a little over 100 feet. And so what we have is southbound traffic going somewhere between 50 and 80 miles an hour because Captain Groskebauer has ticketed people going in excess of 85 miles an hour on this road, pulling into the turn lane to turn left to come into here. At the same time, people are coming, so they'd be coming in and merging at somewhere between 55 or 60 miles an hour to turn here, while these people are coming out, going in the same lane, coming at 15 or 20 miles an hour to begin to queue up to merge. And so we're going to have traffic accidents there. We also have people coming northbound who want to turn left because the pork chop's been eliminated here, and they're going 55 to 70 miles an hour, pulling into this left-hand turn lane as people are coming down south at 55 to 70 miles an hour, pulling into the same lane, or coming out at 5 or 10 or 20 miles an hour into the same lane. So we've got 3 or 4 different groups of people using this particular 100 feet of turn lane to either go left here or come out left here or to come left in here. And it's a huge, huge safety issue for the northern part of the city that's going to result in lots of accidents. We think that it's critical, therefore, to find a way to grant access so that these people can come out here and exit at a light that's directly across from what will be a light here, so we get east-west access. Now, initially, when the city restriped this street, they restriped it wrong, and Captain Groskebauer had to interface with UDOT to have it restriped correctly. The way it was striped, it was illegal for people to come southbound to turn left into here. So we've solved that problem temporarily, but with the expansion of these units and the ability of the 50 or 60 units in North Arbors to come out here under a light, we're creating a major death zone right here if we don't take some action to help mitigate that. And the time to allow this access to come through here is now when they're doing the development initially, not 3 or 4 or 5 years later when we then come back and say, okay, now you have to remodify what you've done here. You have to redo the elevation and those sorts of issues. It's true that the ground here right now is about 3 feet lower than this street, but I'm not sure what the ultimate elevation is going to be. If it's the same level as this street here, it's going to be a lot closer to the elevation of this street between here. So we feel that while the exception would be granted, and it's not necessarily what the developers want to do or the HOA, that this is a city critical issue to create a safe zone for these people, these people, these people, and their guests, and the people traveling up and down University Avenue to have safe ingress and egress. It doesn't exist otherwise. So it seems to us that the time to make that change is now, and not to come back and try and correct it retroactively. So that's why we feel it's important to grant a variance and ask the developer to accommodate some kind of ability for these people to come in and out at this intersection, even if it means they have to give up 3 parking spaces and the city grants the exception for another 5 or 6 motorcycle lots, and they work out between these people, and these people, the mechanism for paying the slight change to make an elevation difference here so that these streets will meet. Thank you. Oh, I got it in time.
I have a few handouts. Is that okay?
Now, you're not a neighborhood chair, and so we haven't opened it for public comment yet.
You said I could go.
Sorry. We'll just, any questions for the neighborhood chairs first? Okay, then we will take this and we will open it for public comment at this time then.
Mr. Chair, if I could, since he represents the HOA, if I could request that he be given a couple of extra minutes in case that's needed for him to represent the people that live there.
Okay. We'll give him two extra.
I have a prepared statement. Can I give copies of that?
Yes.
If you'd like a. My name is Chris Carr. I am an owner at 5198 North University Avenue in Provo, and I'm the president of the Arbors HOA. There actually is a development agreement for this property, recorded in 2007 and again in 2011, stating a maximum of 60 units be built on the lot in question. The Provo City Planning Commission and City Council should not ignore this development agreement and allow more than 60 units be built. The only reason we're here today talking about possible requirement changes is because the developer's pushing to disregard the original development agreement and build more than 60 units. In trying to push through approval for more than 60 units, the developers tried many parking proposals to patchwork quilt a parking plan. One proposal called, I guess the slide isn't up anymore, but that's why I provided it on the paper. One proposal called for adding parking stalls about 200 yards and a significant grade away from the proposed building. The first picture below is a recreational trailer, shows where the proposed parking lot would be located in relation to the HOA clubhouse. The second picture highlights yellow the proposed parking lot and the location of the proposed new building. And that parking doesn't make sense at all, part of the patchwork quilt. Another parking proposal calls for the developer to steal parking unit stalls from the HOA. The developer has harassed, bullied, and threatened the HOA into giving away parking stalls without compensation to the HOA. The HOA already has spent thousands of dollars in attorney fees defending itself against the relentless attempts by the developer to steal property and other benefits from the HOA. The proposal to allow motorcycle stalls count as regular parking stalls is yet another attempt to patchwork quilt this parking plan. I asked as an owner and as the president of the Arbors HOA that the Provo City Council not allow this change. The developer should be required to stick to the development agreement and not build more than 60 units. As proposed, the new development would be a burden to the current HOA, will cost owners more money and increase our monthly dues. Now, it's pointed out that as a motorcycle rider, that we currently have motorcycles in our parking garage, and that is absolutely true. We do have one. But that motorcycle is in addition to a car, not in replace of a car. In his presentation earlier, he even said, store bikes for the winter. Well, when you're storing your bike for the winter, you still have a car. So if you want motorcycle parking, I think that's a great idea, but it's in addition to cars, because most motorcycle owners have a motorcycle in addition to their vehicle. And then also, you spoke at length at the last one, the idea that development agreements are institutional knowledge that are forgotten. Well, this is exactly the case of exactly what's going on here. If you stick to 60 units, none of this would be an issue. 3 stalls, 4 stalls, motorcycle, none of it would be an issue. If the institutional knowledge was still there, that requires no more than 60 units be built. Thank you.
We'll address this one at 60 units per acre. We addressed that earlier, and that change was made, not that we forgot it, that we changed it.
The agreement was amended in 2016.
Was amended. And so the
When you
agreement-
say it was amended, I'm talking about the governing documents of the HOA. The deed restrictions to the property at hand. There's deed restrictions that are recorded at the county recorder's office that says no more than 60 units can be built on this property. So it's an actual deed restriction.
The deed restriction is not a restriction we have, but we were in full conversation with the HOA at the time, numerous meetings, went back and forth. There was a full agreement made between the developers of Arbors 2 and Arbors 1 as to compensation for improvements and other things that would occur to their facilities, as well as the additional revenue that could go toward those facilities.
There's been no compensation. No, there's a bit of rate of our facilities with no compensation.
There is an agreement, though. There was an agreement so for that to take place.
Potentially correct.
Not potentially, it was signed.
It was signed. Part of the problems with the Arbors project is that because of the bankruptcy and the downturn of the market, there was some fraud that went on, and so there was an initial agreement that was signed out of fraud by a person who had no authority. And then that document was then used as leverage against the owners to back them into a deal to be able to steal whatever they wanted to steal. And they used the original agreement that was fraudulent as leverage.
And that doesn't sound like it's an issue, Mr. Jones. That's something that somebody else is going to have to deal with at some point.
Right. I mean, whatever the facts of that situation are, that's a dispute between two private third parties, not involving the city.
Fair enough.
Okay, any other questions at this time? Okay, Mr. Sewell. We'll bring, well, you've got another question here.
Well, I think it's for Mr. Jones, but he may have a comment. So just to clarify, does the deed restriction affect the city's decision-making process, or should it in any way?
No. I don't know how the deed restriction came to be. I don't know if that's simply a recordation of what was in the development agreement that never got removed after the development agreement was amended, but whatever its origin, the only agreement that the city was a party to was the development agreement. And if the development agreement has been amended by the city, then the city's interest in enforcing density no longer exists. If there is still a density restriction as a deed restriction, that could be enforced, but it would need to be enforced by a third party that would be interested in doing so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Connect.
So, it's interesting, the things that go on. I don't see that the two parties are going to necessarily come to any agreement on access between the two properties. So unless someone else can see something here that I'm not seeing, it, they just don't seem to be in a working relationship.
Mr. Henley.
Just wondering if we could ask the applicant to respond, maybe?
I'm fairly new to the company. A lot of these deals were made prior to me coming on, but my understanding is that the 3 HOA presidents ago was when this all took place, and they increased it. They increased everything to 68 units. There was a massive amount of parking that was originally planned, and they said, well, we don't need to do any of that. And so that's how they got to the 68 units, is that you're way over parked. And then it went to planning commission, it went to city council. And then 2 HOA presidents ago and 1 HOA president ago worked together with us, with the city and staff, in multiple meetings to talk about parking and how much support they were giving to it. In order to get our building permits, staff required the last HOA president to write a letter saying how much they were in support of everything that we were doing. And so to have this one come along and say, no, this is all, there's some fraud that happened a long time ago, and this was all done behind the scenes. None of that took place. This was all in front of city councils and planning commissions and planning staffs, with 3 other HOA presidents that amended the deed restrictions and amended the development agreement. And so I'm standing here asking for motorcycle parking so we can move forward with our project, and we're getting drawn into things that happened 5 years ago, and can we please connect 2 developments and 3 HOAs. And so I'm just here to talk about motorcycle parking. The parking up on top was never supposed to be parking that was for us to count toward our parking. The parking up on top is extra parking for RVs. If somebody wants to park an RV up there, it doesn't count toward parking. We're not asking it to count toward parking. They went from, I think, 2.68 or 2.75 to 2.25, and we are at 2.25 parking spaces. And so we're following everything that we're supposed to follow. We're not stealing parking spaces. As a whole, the Arbors has 266 parking spaces. And that's what we are required to have. Well, 265. Motorcycle parking will have in excess of 269 or 70. And so we are going to be in excess of what we're required to have by law in our pro zone. And so we're not taking anything from anybody. In fact, we're going to be helping by alleviating parking spaces by adding a couple motorcycle spots. That's all I can remember that I wanted to say. If there's any other questions.
Okay, any other questions or concerns for council at this time? My frustration with this is that I would like to see this happen as far as the development, but I also want to see the crossing at the intersection. I think that is an important issue. I'm not sure how to deal with this at this time, to say this has to happen. We've already agreed to the development. And I get frustrated to come back and say, no, we changed our mind. You have to redo something else. I get frustrated with that personally. Mr. Harding.
The way I look at it is we have already approved the 2.25 parking. And if I could be wrong on this, but I believe that parking is sufficient for 67 units. The developer would like to do 68 and has proposed what I think is a reasonable request to count some motorcycle parking. But right now, what the developer is entitled to do is 67 units. So because they want to do 68, and because the neighbors have asked, is there some way that we can connect the parking lots to address the safety of who will be the future residents of this HOA as well as other developments nearby? Is that something we can say, well, you'd like to do this, and this is something that we'd like to see happen. Therefore, can we work out a deal that's mutually beneficial? The flip side of that, I agree. I mean, I think it is quite reasonable to say, hey, if we put in this motorcycle parking, can we have this count so we can do our 68? I don't think that's unreasonable as well, but I do think there is an argument that could be made on why we might say, if you would like this 68th unit, which right now they're not entitled to, can we work out a deal?
Mr. Maxfield, has there been any attempt to get the three HOAs together to discuss this specifically about getting an intersection where that future light will be? Have we done that?
No, we weren't able to do that since the last meetings, but that would, I think would be the future direction for sure. We'd like to get them all together and discuss that with UDOT and everybody else.
And do you see any reason why we ought not to pass this tonight? And in terms of that possibility, I guess, as we talked about last week, it's not the intention of the applicant to have this relevant to that egress, but since that's on everybody's mind, and then I just want to make sure we're not binding ourselves in some way that makes that less likely. So if we pass this tonight, we're actually making it still possible, right? That can still be a future conversation that needs to happen.
Right. It'll be a number of months before they're ever to a point where that's a critical part of the development. Something that's not going to move the building, it's not going to move some of the construction if that, began. But it would leave that time open where we could meet with everybody and see what we can work out. Again, we would have to come back to council and have discussions regarding costs and other opportunities. Obviously, I have the agreement of the different groups, but that's something we could certainly have. That gives us a time period, actually during the start of building construction, to where that negotiation could take place.
Okay.
Are we losing leverage if we pass it tonight?
No, because they can build 67 units now without any change. I think it's, they won't have that one parking space, but there'd have to be a trade-off of cost benefit to them. Is it worth that one space to negotiate, or say, no, it's easier just to not put in the space? And again, working with HOAs, are they using, their use of leverage also? So it's, I don't know, it can be used both ways. I don't think it's that big of a thing. If you were approving 8 more units, that might be an issue, kind of a thing. But, with one parking space, I'd have to have them answer, but the cost doesn't seem to equate out to, well, I don't know. I'd have to think that one out. But. Oh, okay. Is that okay?
We're willing to talk about it. Again, on our building, on both sides of our building, we had way more parking than we needed because we cut way into the hillside, and it's already been pinned and screened and everything. And so just to save costs, because each one of those pins was $1,500, and they told us we needed, I can't remember how many it was, 50 pins in order to get our parking. And so we pulled the parking back and started looking to make sure we still had enough parking, but we lost 10 spaces by trying to save, $1 million on pinning. So we could, if we needed to get 68 units, we could push one more spot into the hillside. But we don't really want to do that because I want to do motorcycle parking anyway. And so we could do that, but it would just cost money to get that 68th unit. And it's already been approved, building permitted and everything, and it's just waiting to be built if we find one more spot. So we could find it. It's just, this is so much easier and more beneficial to do it this way. We're not like, we can never do this, we need this. We could cut into the hillside, we just don't want to because of the costs for doing it. But we are completely willing to talk. I mean, we talked already about it. We're willing to talk. I've never talked to the HOA president next door. And as far as, this is the first I've ever heard that this is something that the city has made a deal with UDOT about. I thought it was completely off the table because UDOT told us it's an exception to be within, 1,000 feet of another light, or the Stonegate light at the north end and the south end was an exception, so there's no way they'll let another one in there. And so I didn't think it was ever going to happen, but now that the city's made a deal, we're willing to talk. It's just, going to cause problems for parking issues and covered parking issues and everything, but not saying we can't work through it. We just want to get past this issue tonight. So, thanks.
Mr. Harding.
So it does sound to me like we would be losing some leverage. It doesn't prevent them from doing 68, but it is money, and money is leverage. One thing we could consider, though, is passing this as kind of a sign of goodwill and encourage them to not just listen and talk about it, but to meet our move of goodwill with some goodwill of their own to see if there is a workable solution for not only the benefit of the others in the area, but also the benefit of their own residents.
Any other discussion? Mr. Sewell?
It doesn't feel like this is very much of a bargaining chip to me, fairly small one, and so I think we should decide based on the merits tonight and do whatever we can to encourage the parties to get together for the safety of their own residents as well as the safety of the rest of the residents of the city that use that road. That should be, I think, their biggest motivation.
Mr. Henley.
I agree. I would only say I'd be more assured. Your language of "we're willing to talk" doesn't quite persuade me of your commitment. And I mean, it's now part of the public record. If that motivates you and who you represent a little bit to say, hey, we've been warned, we've been told that there's a safety issue that's coming on the horizon if we build this, and we're gonna have to be answerable to the potential problems that we're going to create, and we're fully committed to addressing those. That's the kind of language I would feel more assured by. Yeah.
We met with Mike Rohn a couple years ago about this, not ever thinking it would come up because of the difficulties of working with UDOT. If they've got it worked out, we are committed to, it makes sense because it goes straight into Riverwoods right there. We're committed to talking to the HOA of the north part of our development. We'll be in charge of our HOA for a while, and then to the one to the south, and trying to work through how this could work out, who pays for what. We will negotiate in earnest, and we'd like to come back to the city because there's going to be costs and issues, involved in that too, that all three of us are going to want to talk about, I'm sure.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, we have an implied motion on the table then. We have continued this, so without any other changes in the motion, we can go with the implied motion. Mr. Harding, do you have?
Clarification, the implied motion is for the 1 out of 25 or the 1 out of 50?
And that's a good point.
Based on the discussion we had last week, it should be for whatever the recommendation coming from the Planning Commission was, but last week we had the wrong materials.
I think it is 50.
Let's see, what's in the...
I think the materials were set 25, so.
We've still got 25 in the materials, it looks like.
I'm actually a little more comfortable with the 1 out of 25 if we're trying to leave the options open to make it as flexible as possible for a future agreement. So I think I'd prefer to vote on the 1 out of 25. Knowing that's probably not the silver bullet that enables it, but it just adds a little bit more flexibility. And as Mr. Maxfield said earlier, this only applies to this PRO. So it sounds like everyone's comfortable with 25, so I'd rather go with 25 just to keep our options as open as possible.
So just for the sake of procedure, I would say that my opinion last week was, and I think I should stick with it for consistency's sake, that since the 50 was the Planning Commission's recommendation, that is what the implied motion applies to. So it would take a substitute motion to vote on the 25 instead.
So I move that we change the implied motion. Is that the right way to do that? I move that we change the implied motion to be for the ratio to move it from 1 out of 50 to 1 out of 25.
Excuse me, lost a voice. What's the reasoning again? What's the worry?
So either will work for the immediate plan, which is to gain 1 more parking stall or to reduce the requirement by 1, or to fulfill the requirement of 1 more by 2 motorcycle spots. If an interconnection is made, it may eliminate more parking stalls, and so a 1 out of 25 ratio gives them more ways to fulfill the parking requirements. There still may need to be something else that happens, but the 1 out of 25 just gives them a little more flexibility than 1 out of 50. And it only applies to this, so I'm not worried about unintended consequences.
Yeah, I mean, I see that. I was sort of assured, I thought, that the 1 out of 50 gave us enough room to be flexible with that. If you do 1 out of 25, I mean, I'm not convinced you need very many motorcycle spaces. And I would be a little worried about feeling like we were dealing with the parking problems of a large resident area when you've got, I don't know, you end up with 12 or 15 motorcycle spots and not enough parking for cars. But anyway, I mean, I have a slight preference for what as is, I guess, but I'm not going to go to the mat over that. I just, I think 1 out of 50 is adequate.
And I'm not passionate about the 1 out of 25. You make a very good point, and almost to the point that I withdraw my. But I don't know. I'd like to hear what the other council members. But I don't feel passionately one way or other. I can move forward with either.
Mr. Sewell.
I'll second the motion. I lean toward the 25 also, just to make sure that we're giving maximum flexibility to work toward a solution to the interconnection problem.
It's hard to have passion at 9 o'clock.
It's hard to have passion at 9 o'clock.
You know, I am personally willing to go to 25 just to make it. If that's part of the negotiation, that's no problem. I don't think that'd be a problem for any of the council. I would like to keep it at 50 personally, but I'd go down to less than that. I would really like, I strongly feel we need this intersection at this exit at a lighted for a lighted signal. And so I'd like to keep it at 50 with the discussion and possibility of maybe even doing what's necessary to get that light taken care of.
Unless Mr. Sewell objects, I'll withdraw my motion, but with the idea that we may need to do something further in the future.
So the implied motion is for 50, but what is written, has that been changed?
Well, I turned it off. We have materials, we have written resolutions for both. The one that was posted to SIRE is the one for 25.
I just want to make sure we display what we're voting on. We always like to do that, right?
I'm looking at one April 11th that says 50. Am I looking at the wrong one on my own laptop or my own iPad? It's a Planning Commission staff report.
Oh, right, yes, so the right one is included in, yeah, but is that just the language or is that the entire resolution? So the staff report contains the right language, but that exhibit is not actually the ordinance.
Oh.
So the ordinance, which is the second item in SIRE, says 25 for some reason. Kelsey, do you have access in the issue file to the 50? What's that? Is the 51 in the issue file so that you can bring it up?
What's currently on the screen is 50, so I'm ready to go ahead.
Great.
Okay, we have the implied motion, which is 50 required, 50 spaces. 1 in 50. Any discussion? We all understand? Call for a vote then. Those in favor? That passes unanimously with Mr. Van Buren excused. And please get together and let's see what we can do to work this out. I think it's important that we do that for the safety of your residents in both units and Canyon Brook. And
start organizing it tomorrow.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate that. We will, if there's no objection, we will declare this meeting adjourned by unanimous consent.
There's an old saying that there's not much difference.
Yeah. You wanna hold or punch? I said, do you want to be the holder or the puncher?
I don't want to be accessory.
You know, he's standing alone. There's nobody else, definitely not similar, and we've got no having whatsoever. He's providing zero.
Right.
It's like, what is going on? I mean,
And I'm going, do I smell a lawsuit?
wow. Well, yeah, this is the problem.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Coming from you.